Chapter 796. It was a pity that Yang Qindong was stronger, and in the end, Shin Kuan died in battle. However, because of this matter, Jin Buchuan was hated by the Security Bureau. If it wasn't for Yang Qindong saying that he would personally take care of this person, he would already be a cold corpse. The Imperial Guard Baihu, standing beside Jin Buchuan, was named Tong Lai. He was originally just a hoodlum on the streets, but he relied on his bootlicking skills to enter the Imperial Guard. After relying on Jin Buchuan, he was able to obtain the position of Baihu. It was as if a black chicken had turned into a phoenix. After becoming a Baihu and enjoying the benefits of power, Tong Lai was no longer satisfied with his current position. He wanted to continue climbing up, so he started to rope in capable people. This Chen Guo was someone he had his eyes on. Reality proved that his judgment was not wrong. This person that he relied on as his trusted aide brought him good news. They had actually found the Mongol army's spy in the capital and found a place for them to stay. The Mongol army's spy in the capital had always been in existence that gave the Imperial Guard headaches. They came and went without a trace, and their organization was very tight. They were like an annoying mosquito that would appear when you were sleeping and disappear when you woke up to look for them. For this matter, the Imperial Guard had used a lot of manpower and resources, but the results were not what they wanted. Now, they had actually found traces of them and even locked onto their specific location. How could this news not make them excited? Seeing Chen Guo appear, it was as if he had seen power and gold. Tong Lai anxiously asked, "Did you find where they are staying? Did they find you?" "We've been changing people to follow them back to the Baihu, so they did not find us. Right now, we still have my brother outside keeping watch." Chen Guo answered as expected. She then raised her head and smiled, as if she was asking for a reward. Jin Buchuan saw this, and a trace of disdain appeared in his eyes. People like this only wanted money and power. There was no loyalty in relying on people like this. However, these people were often the best targets to be used because they would do anything for money. It was this appearance that made Jin Buchuan's heart calm down. He also found out from Tong Lai that there was more than one embroidered, uniformed guard watching them, so the possibility of them being connected was close to zero. Good. If that's the case, then I'll have to ask Brother Qinghua to lead the way. The sound of a male duck's throat was extremely thin, making people feel uncomfortable after hearing it. But at this moment, no one dared to say such a thing. They all lowered their heads and cupped their fists, saying, "Congratulations, sir, for making a new contribution." Let's go. Jin Buchuan, who appeared to be extremely happy, laughed heartily as he walked out of this ordinary little courtyard under the escort of the crowd. Chen Guo lowered her head and walked at the very front. Her lowered head revealed a resolute expression, completely different from the flattering smile from before. Other than himself, no one else knew about his other identity. One of the secret agents of the Security Bureau. He was one of the members who had infiltrated the embroidered uniform guard 3 years ago. Because he had never been sent on a mission, his identity was unknown to outsiders. But just a few days ago, when he had just returned home, he had suddenly been captured and brought to an unknown place with his head covered. There he had met his highest superior, the head of the Security Bureau, Yongsan. In his excitement, he had accepted a new mission. From that moment on, Chen Guo knew that his opportunity to perform a meritorious service had come. If he performed well, he might even be able to stand out among his peers and bring glory to his ancestors. With this excitement, he carefully studied every detail of the mission, which led to the scene where he took the initiative to appear here today. The others didn't know what Qin Guo was thinking. Everyone still treated him as one of their own, following behind him as they walked down the main street. What he didn't know was that every step he took forward was a step closer to death. Following behind Chen Guo, it didn't take long for them to arrive at a place bustling with activity. This place was clearly more lively than many other places nearby. If this wasn't the immortal abode, where else could it be? They're here. Jin Buchuan couldn't help but frown when he saw the immortal abode. It wasn't because he felt that something was wrong, but because he had just received news that the Duke of Loyalty had come to the immortal abode with his 2 wives. Jin Buchuan felt a bit of fear towards the Duke of Loyalty. Even though this person was so powerful that even his godfather had to avoid him, the main reason was that he was the one who had sent the assassin Shin Kuin. Even though the assassin was already dead, and there was no proof, if the Duke of Loyalty went crazy, would he be able to reason with him? Jin Buchuan felt a bit uncertain. Beside him, the official Tong Lai didn't know about any of this. As soon as he entered, he only raised his head and glanced at the 3 words immortal abode, then stopped thinking about it. This wasn't surprising. The embroidered uniform guard only had a goal in mind. They didn't care about the process. So what if it was the immortal abode? A while ago, the embroidered uniform guards had gone to the residence of Hu Shao, the Minister of Rights. They had even taken away his eldest son. Nothing major had happened. Because of this, a small immortal abode was naturally nothing in his eyes. You guys come here. The sharp-eyed Tong Lai discovered several other embroidered uniform guard agents hidden among the commoners. He waved his hand and called them over. Let me ask you, did that Mongol enter this place? Yes, we saw it with our own eyes. The agents all nodded, confirming Chen Guo's words. Tong Lai was also a smart person. He never placed all his trust in a single person. Now that everyone was saying the same thing, he couldn't help but believe 90% of it. All right, since that's the case, Qinghua and you too come with me. I want to confirm it. Tong Lai was a very careful person. Even though Jin Buchuan was here, he wasn't afraid of the immortal abode's powerful background. However, if he didn't have conclusive evidence, he wouldn't make a move so casually. After all, there were many officials who ate here every day. Any small matter that happened here could turn into a huge matter. Jin Buchuan saw Tong Lai's cautiousness and felt extremely gratified. He really was worried that this person would charge in without a care. If that happened, not only would they fail to catch the person, they would also get themselves into trouble. Very good. Go ahead. As long as you confirm that the person we're looking for is here. Even if it's the immortal abode, it doesn't matter. We can still catch the person here. If anyone dares to obstruct us, we'll punish them for the same crime. Jin Buchuan's words made Tong Lai extremely excited. This meant that he had a backer now. He hurriedly nodded. Rest assured, sir. Just wait here for my good news. Let's go. Tong Lai led Qinghua and his other brother into the immortal abode just like that. As soon as they entered, Qinghua flashed a membership card. Even though it was the lowest level, it was still like a pass. No one stopped them. Seeing that Qinghua had even prepared a membership card, Tong Lai couldn't help but nod his head in approval. Then, the 3 of them directly went upstairs. Coincidentally, as soon as the 3 of them reached the 2nd floor, they saw a figure appear in front of them. Then, that figure gradually disappeared into the distance, heading straight for the 3rd floor of the immortal abode. That's the person we were watching before. This time, Qinghua didn't need to say anything. The other person took the initiative to speak. In fact, even without him saying anything, Tong Lai also noticed that the person was wearing a Han Chinese robe. However, underneath the robe was a pair of Mongol felt boots. This kind of felt boots had become a symbol of the Mongol people, and a very obvious one at that. Of course, this wasn't much. The most important thing was the way this person walked. He didn't walk like an ordinary Han Chinese, but rather like a crab walking sideways. Normally, a person could disguise themselves and change their appearance. However, the way they walked was something that had been ingrained for many years. It wasn't something that could be changed just because one wanted to. It was precisely because of this that Tong Lai recognized this person's identity. Putting aside whether or not he was a spy, he was definitely a Mongol. Sir, he went to the 3rd floor. With this membership card in my hand, I can't go up to the 3rd floor. If I don't do it properly, I'll attract trouble. Qinghua looked at the card in her hand with a mournful expression, then shook her head. No matter. Tong Lai didn't seem to mind at all. Changua, immediately go and inform Sir that I've already locked onto the Mongol spy. Sir, please come and apprehend him. Without a membership card, they could only force their way in. With Tong Lai's strength, it might be a bit troublesome, but with Jin Buchuan, there wasn't much of a problem. Behind him was Chief Steward Jining. In the capital, there was nothing that he couldn't handle. Moreover, if they really did catch the Mongol spy here, it would be a great achievement. At that time, they would be able to control the immortal abode. It would be normal for them to bleed a bit. When that time came, wouldn't he also have to bask in the glory? After receiving the order, Chungwa turned around and went downstairs. At this point, she knew that the plan was already more than half complete. Tong Lai didn't have to wait for long. Soon, Jin Buchuan led the 8 embroidered uniform guards up to the second floor. Unlike Chungwa, he rushed up the stairs with the embroidered uniform guard token in hand. As such, he attracted quite a few of the Immortal Abode's staff members. Sir, everyone here is a guest. There shouldn't be any bad people. Is there a misunderstanding? One of the Immortal Abode's staff members said with an apologetic smile as he led 2 young men to the second floor. It seemed like they were going to stop Jin Buchuan from taking action here. Chapter 797. Misunderstanding my ass. This lord discovered Mongolian spies here and are going to conduct a search. If you're tactful and cooperate, we can lessen your punishment. Otherwise, we'll throw you into the imperial prison and let you know that sometimes even death is a beautiful thing. Revealing a ferocious expression, Jin Buchuan used his croaky voice to threaten the steward who followed him. The manager was clearly frightened. He didn't know what to say for a moment. Don't say this and that. Let me tell you, cooperate with us, or we'll arrest you right now. All right, I'll give you a chance. Go up to the 3rd floor and invite all the guests out. Tong Lai stepped up to the manager's side and flashed the spring embroidered blade in his hand. He looked like he really would kill at the slightest provocation. This really did scare the manager. Afraid of death, he could only nod. Fine, I'll cooperate with you. With the manager leading the way, the waiters on the 3rd floor naturally didn't dare stop them. Jin Buchuan, Tong Lai, and the others smoothly arrived on the 3rd floor. Afterwards, they began to clear out the rooms one by one. Those who could dine on the 3rd floor naturally all had the highest membership cards. Their statuses were also different from ordinary people. They were eating here, but the Immortal Abode's manager suddenly asked them to leave first. Of course, they were all extremely dissatisfied. Those with bad tempers immediately began to curse. However, as the embroidered uniform guards in flying robes appeared one after another, they all shut their mouths. Just a while ago, the genie guards had even arrested the eldest son of Minister Hu Xianshu. He was also the genie guards' town commissioner. He was one of their own. However, when he made a move, he did not show any mercy. What were they? They had angered him. So what if he killed them on the spot? They were still dissatisfied, but they didn't show it. They only snorted coldly and walked out of the room. Jin Buchuan didn't even bother to look at the dissatisfaction shown by these people. He only asked Tong Lai, "How is it? Did you find that Mongolian?" "No, none of these people are Mongolians." Tong Lai stared intently. He was confident that as long as that person appeared, he would be able to recognize him. He would never make a mistake. Just like that, the private rooms were emptied one after another. More and more people walked out of the room, but they still couldn't find any trace of that person. For a moment, Tong Lai wasn't as confident as before. Layers of cold sweat began to form on his forehead. "My lord, there's only one room left. Please take a look." That manager looked at Jin Buchuan as if his parents had died and spoke in a pleading tone. "The last room needs to be searched even more. The person we're looking for might be here." Jin Buchuan did not show any signs of stopping. With such a big fuss, If he returned without any results, it was likely that not long after a memorial to impeach him would appear on the emperor's dragon table. He didn't want to be punished, and his mind was in a mess. He had completely forgotten that the Duke of Loyalty was currently eating in the immortal abode. Seeing how unreasonable Jin Buchuan was, the manager could only lead 2 embroidered, uniformed guards to knock on the door of the final private room. Without waiting for permission to be admitted from within, they pushed open the door and entered. Soon after, 3 figures flew out. Tong tong! The figures landed on the floor, causing the entire floor to tremble. However, this also caused Jin Buchuan and Tong Lai's eyes to brighten. Haha! They actually dared to make an enemy out of our embroidered uniform guards. They must be the people we're looking for. Attack together. Capture them. At this moment, the 2 of them only had eyes for the Mongol agents they were looking for. All other problems had been thrown to the back of their minds. This was a solid achievement, a good opportunity for them to rise in rank and make a fortune. As the 2 of them roared, the embroidered uniform guards behind them also charged forward. This was Ming's capital, and their intelligence reports had said that the Mongol agents were secretly meeting. There shouldn't be too many of them, only 2 or 3 at most. They had more than 10 people in total, so what was there to be afraid of? In order to become an embroidered uniform guard, one had to undergo a strict test in terms of skill. Even if some people had special talents, they still had to undergo frequent training after entering the organization. After all, when it came to a crucial moment, when they fought with others, they wouldn't care about their status. If they were too weak and let the enemy escape from under their noses, wouldn't that be a slap in the face? The group of embroidered uniform guards, who prided themselves on being elites, pulled out their spring embroidered sabers and charged into the private room, one after another. However, they didn't know what kind of elites they were going to face next. They were the kind of cold vanguards who were 5 to 10 times stronger than the embroidered uniform guards. They were the kind of veterans who had fought countless battles on the battlefield and were still unscathed. Yes, this private room was Sky Room Number 1. It was the place where Yang Qindong, 2nd Madam, and 4th Madam were eating together. Considering that he was eating with Madam, Yang Qindong didn't bring too many people. However, since they were in a foreign place, the other guards were arranged to go downstairs. Beta Persei, Yang Si, Badeo Jiang, Pengyu, and Shibi were still in the private room. The 5 of them weren't bad at fighting. The only problem was that Shibi was a little thin because of long-term malnutrition. However, when it came to fighting skills, 2 or 3 ordinary embroidered uniform guards couldn't take him down. Of course, the figure who had led Tong Lai away was him. This was also the task Yang Qindong had arranged for him early in the morning. Letting a Han and Mongolian mixed-blood general who had lived in Mongolia for a long time play the role of a Mongolian spy, no one would be able to see any flaws. After the mission was completed, Shibi entered Sky Room Number 1 and put on a set of black armor that had been stored there for a long time. After changing his clothes, his entire temperament immediately changed. Even though they were face to face, Tong Lai couldn't tell the difference between this person and a Han, nor could he tell the relationship between him and a Mongolian. When Jin Buchuan and Tong Lai reached the 3rd floor, chaos broke out outside. Yang Qindong, who was eating with the 2 madams, knew that the fish had taken the bait. However, he didn't panic in the slightest. On the contrary, he continued to drink with the madams in the private room, as if he didn't care at all about what was happening outside. With Yang Qindong's current status, it would be too shameful for him to personally take part in the fighting. He left it for Beta Persei and the others to deal with. Knowing that something unexpected might happen, but knowing that everything was under control, Beta Persei and the others naturally rolled up their sleeves and prepared to go all out. When the door was pushed open from the outside, everyone began to move without a word. Not only were the first 2 embroidered uniform guards sent flying, even the manager of the immortal abode, who had been forced to lead the way, was sent flying with a kick. After beating up the first group, this was only the beginning. More and more embroidered uniform guards rushed in, brandishing their swords as they attacked. They didn't care at all, and their attitudes were extremely arrogant. Normally, Beta Persei and the others were at the sixth young master's side. Wherever they went, they were respected. Even when facing enemies, they didn't show the slightest bit of fear, let alone these dozen or so embroidered uniform guards. Naturally, they wouldn't be polite. If you don't report your name, then we don't have to ask. Let's beat you up first. Ding ding dang dang. After a few exchanges, all of the embroidered uniform guards who had rushed in were knocked to the ground. Only Jin Buchuan and Tong Lai were still standing. Even Chen Gua, who had been mixed in with the crowd, had been knocked to the ground. Blood was still dripping from the corner of her mouth. It looked so real. The security bureau was a vertical management. Perhaps Yang Qindong already knew Qin Gua's identity, or perhaps he didn't. However, Beta Persei and the others definitely did know. Therefore, when they attacked just now, they didn't hold back at all. This was actually the perfect disguise. 10 embroidered uniform guard brothers were knocked to the ground. This scene caused Jin Buchuan's chest to heave up and down. Quite a few of these people were wearing the uniform of the embroidered uniform guard. He did not believe that the other party could not see through their identities. Even if they knew, they still dared to attack. Just based on this, these people deserved to die. Jin Buchuan's eyes flashed with anger. He already regarded the people in front of him as dead. The only one standing beside him, Tong Lai, also had a face full of anger. They were embroidered uniform guards. Even if they rushed into a minister's house to arrest someone, no one would dare to stop them. Now, they were actually beaten in a restaurant. How could he take this lying down? Although the other party's aura seemed to be stronger at this moment, and 3 of the 5 people were wearing black armor, giving off a very fierce feeling, he still angrily rebuked, "Who are you people? Do you know that we're embroidered uniform guards handling a case?" "We don't know." Beta Persei, who was wearing ordinary civilian clothes, was the first to step forward. Then he looked at Tong Lai and said in a tone that didn't show any signs of backing down, "This is a place to eat. Who are you to dare to trespass here? Needless to say, you're clearly not good people." Yang Si, who was wearing civilian clothes, also took a step forward and said, "For more than a year, the embroidered uniform guards had been pressuring the Yang family's forces step by step. Although they didn't do anything excessive because Yang Qindong was outside, it was only the result of restraint on both sides. Because of this, he didn't know how much anger he had suppressed in his heart. Now that he finally had a chance to vent it, he had to seize it properly. In a very short period of time, the 2 people exchanged questions and answers. In particular, they directly pointed out that the embroidered uniform guards were not good people. This angered Tong Lai. If it weren't for the fact that they looked strong, he would have directly raised his sword and cut them down. Fortunately, he didn't forget that he still had Jin Buchuan behind him, so he didn't make a decision on his own. Instead, he turned around and looked awkwardly. Jin Buchuan was also furious. Commoners knew not to scold bald thieves in front of monks. Now, these people actually dared to say that the embroidered uniform guards were not good people in front of the embroidered uniform guards. If he didn't show the toughness he should have, once this matter spread out, how could he establish himself in the future? Chapter 798. In his anger, when he saw Tong Lai looking at him, his face flushed red as he said, "Why are you looking at me? Do I need to tell you the consequences of obstructing the embroidered uniform guards from handling a case?" "Ah, there's no need." Tong Lai immediately understood Jin Buchuan's meaning. He recalled how he personally went to the Hu estate to capture Hu Zhongning a few days ago. How could he admit defeat now? After hearing Jin Buchuan's words, he seemed to be filled with courage. He waved the shining embroidered spring saber in his hand in midair and shouted, "We, the embroidered uniform guards, are going to investigate a case. All of you scram. Anyone who blocks our way will be killed, without mercy." As he spoke, Tong Lai strode forward. His target was the inner room. He believed that the person hiding inside was the Mongolian he saw earlier. As long as he could find this person, he would have the upper hand in this matter. Tong Lai walked forward courageously, as if he was the boss. However, an arm suddenly reached out from beside him. Before he could react, the embroidered spring saber in his hand was taken away. Then, with a backhand slash, the blade slapped Tong Lai's arm. The intense pain caused him to cry out in pain. His body also staggered back a few steps. Rebel, rebel, just you wait. I will kill all of you. I will also kill your entire family. Seeing that there was someone who dared to obstruct the embroidered uniform guards from investigating a case, Jin Buchuan roared hysterically in anger. Then he decisively turned around and left. As the saying goes, a wise man knows better than to fight when the odds are against him. He wanted to gather more embroidered uniform guards. He wanted to kill all of these people. Not a single one of them would be left alive. Jin Buchuan had always been high and mighty. He couldn't see the situation in front of him clearly and thought that he could walk out unscathed. However, he forgot one thing. Sometimes, even if he didn't find trouble with others, it didn't mean that others wouldn't find trouble with him. Just as Jin Buchuan turned around, Ba Daojiang, who had received Jin Buchuan's instructions, leaped forward and arrived behind Jin Buchuan. Then he extended his large hand. Jin Buchuan, who was about to walk out, suddenly felt his neck tighten. Then he was sent flying. His body did a 180-degree spin and fell to the ground with a plop. This hit made him see stars. All the bones in his body seemed to have become soft and sore at this moment. Jin Buchuan, who had been smashed into a daze, opened his eyes after about 5 or 6 breaths of time. What he saw was the scene of him kneeling on the ground. Then he shook his head violently and said, "What are you trying to do? Do you know who I am?" No one answered Jin Buchuan's question. Only a few pairs of eyes coldly stared at him. It was as if they were staring at a dying mad dog. Apart from coldness, there was only coldness in their eyes. Jin Buchuan felt his entire body turn cold. He suddenly realized something. Now wasn't the time for him to show off. Instead, it was a problem of whether or not he could protect himself. None of the people in front of him seemed easy to deal with. Just as Jin Buchuan's mind gradually cleared up, the door to the innermost room in the sky, room number 1, finally opened. A figure also walked out. As this person's footsteps gradually approached, an indescribable pressure slowly formed, causing Jin Buchuan, who was still half kneeling on the ground, to feel his hair stand on end. The person who had come was tall, and his footsteps were steady. There was also a smile on his face that didn't fit the current atmosphere. However, even though there was a smile on his face, Jin Buchuan didn't know why, but when he raised his head and looked at him, he felt suffocated. He had already seen the appearance of the person who had come, so his mouth was wide open at this moment. Duke of Loyalty. Oh, you recognize me. As if he was very surprised that Jin Buchuan was able to recognize him, Yang Qindong's smile grew even wider. However, this sort of smile could be described as the smile of a demon. Reality also proved that after he smiled, Yang Qindong's expression suddenly turned cold. Since you recognize me, you still dare to come and find trouble for me, and even say that you will exterminate my 9 generations? Humph, I really don't know who gave you the guts. Ah, only now did Jin Buchuan realize how big of a mistake he had made. Although the Duke of Loyalty was feared by the Emperor, he wasn't an existence that would be publicly provoked. He had heard from many of his colleagues that if the Emperor really wanted to deal with the Duke of Loyalty, he wouldn't have allowed him to enter the capital. This was an existence that even the Emperor didn't want to provoke. He had just said that he wanted to exterminate his 9 generations, and so many of his brothers had heard it. At this moment, it seemed like he wouldn't be able to clear his name even if he fell into the Yellow River. When he thought of the severity of the problem and how his godfather would deal with him after he returned, Jean Buchuan's legs that were originally half-kneeling suddenly all knelt down. Then, like a pug that was wagging its tail to its master, he crawled forward several steps until he was 2 meters away from Yang Qindong. Duke of Loyalty, it's all this lowly one's fault. I didn't know you were here. You didn't know I was here? Don't you know where this place is? Don't you know what the number 1 heaven room represents? Humph. After mingling in the capital for so long, there's no need for you to deny it. I can see that you're here for me. It's just that you're not strong enough to kill me, so you want to admit your mistake and escape first. But once I let you go, I'm afraid that a large group of embroidered uniform guards will immediately surround this place. You've probably wanted to kill me 100 times before you're satisfied, right? As Yang Qindong spoke, he slowly squatted down and looked at Jean Buchuan as though he was looking at a dead dog. Your scheme didn't succeed, and you're thinking of begging for mercy now. Isn't it a little too late? If anyone who wants to kill me can leave safely, I'm sure that everyone will want to try their luck in the future. Sigh, although I'm a soft-hearted person, I won't allow others to threaten my safety for no reason. Thus, I can only wrong you a little. Haha, deal with these 2 leaders. I've already said that I'm a soft-hearted person, so I'll only punish the leaders. But if there's anyone else who doesn't have eyes the next time, I'll kill them all. Leave no one alive. These words seem to be in order for Beta Persei and the others, as well as a death sentence for Jean Buchuan. But at the same time, they also seemed to be for the embroidered, uniform guards who had been beaten to the ground, their faces swollen and bruised. After saying all this, he didn't even look at Jean Buchuan. He turned around and walked back into the private room. There were still 2 madams waiting for him. Since they were out for a meal, it was best not to let some matters affect their appetite. As Yang Qindong's figure gradually disappeared into the distance, Jean Buchuan's face turned ghastly pale. He finally remembered that the Immortal Abode's number 1 room could only be used by 2 people. One of them was the current emperor. In this regard, Zhu Qijin of Yingzhong would often visit this room. Of course, Zhu Qiu of Daizhong also had this right now. The second person was the Immortal Abode's biggest boss, Yang Qindong. This place was originally his property, so he could obviously spend his money wherever he wanted. This was something everyone was familiar with. But just then, Jean Buchuan had completely forgotten about this. He'd rushed in without even looking. This should have been planned ahead of time. Jean Buchuan was still in a daze. While he was still regretting his impudence, the scene in front of him once again drew all of his mental energy over. While he was in a daze, Beta Persei had already lifted Tong Lai up and brought him in front of Jean Buchuan like a dead dog. Second brother, leave this person to me. How about you kill the big one? As if he didn't want Beta Persei to monopolize the limelight, Yang Si chuckled and also walked over. All right, then we'll each take one. Beta Persei seemed to be someone who readily accepted good advice. He listened to Yang Si's suggestion. He tossed Tong Lai to the ground and reached out his hand to grab Jean Buchuan. In just a moment, Yang Si had already arrived in front of Tong Lai with a sharp dagger. He first smiled, then raised his hand and brought the dagger down. A piece of fresh flesh flew into the air, but to everyone's surprise, only a piece of flesh flew out. There was no blood. Just from this point alone, one could tell that Yang Si was already a qualified butcher. He knew how to do it without drawing blood and still cut off a piece of flesh. This isn't good. You're already starting. Don't act shamelessly. It was as if they were playing a game. Seeing that Yang Si had already taken the lead and swung his dagger, Beta Persei chuckled and also took out a sharp dagger. This scene frightened Jean Buchuan. With Tong Lai as an example, how could he not know what the other party was going to do? Not only was he going to kill, but he was going to torture him to death. This was the method he used to deal with others. In his shock, when he realized that Yang Qindong really dared to kill him, Jean Buchuan was finally terrified. He opened his mouth and shouted, "What are you doing? Do you know who I am? I'm going to..." Swoosh! blood, and flesh flew out. A chunk of fat flew out from under Jin Buchuan's ribs, separated from his body. The one who attacked was Beta Persei. He slashed again and again. As he cut off piece after piece of fat, he did not forget to say, "You don't even F*** King know who you are. So how would we know who you are? People with your IQ shouldn't live in this world and waste food." Chapter 799 / Beta Persei and Yang Si seemed to be in a competition. In a short period of time, 108 pieces of flesh fell from Jin Buchuan and Tong Lai's bodies. The pain of this process could not be described with words. The other embroidered uniform guards who were beaten to the ground trembled all over as they watched the flesh of the two lords being sliced in front of them. Then, from the initial fear to the middle stages of struggle, and finally to the end, they died with their eyes wide open. One of Jin Ying's godson, one of the embroidered uniform guard Baihu who had just performed a meritorious service, died in front of them. At the beginning he struggled a few times, but in the end he was completely at the mercy of others. All of this fell into the eyes of the 10 embroidered uniform guards who followed them, causing them to close their eyes in fear. Although the Duke of Loyalty had said that only the big ones could be dealt with and the small ones could be spared, who knew if the executors, Beta Persei and Yang Si, would do anything to them in their agitation? If that was the case, they could not resist at all. They were completely fish on the chopping board, at the mercy of others, just as the 10 brothers of the embroidered uniform guard, with the exception of Qinghua, were nervous. Yang Si opened his mouth. "Second brother, I haven't had enough yet. Should we take out a few more people to kill? This feels so good." After he finished speaking, Yang Si's cold eyes stared at the 10 embroidered uniform guards. Every time he looked at someone, that person would quickly lower his head, as if he was afraid of being targeted and becoming the next person to be cut off. Fortunately, Beta Persei spoke at this time. "Forget it. Young master's orders must be obeyed. As for you wanting to kill people for fun, there should be a chance in the future. There will always be some blind people looking for trouble. When that time comes, you can just kill them all. Who knows? They might even make a move on us in the future." No, they won't. This time, there was no need for anyone to teach them. The 10 embroidered uniform guards answered honestly, shaking their heads as they spoke. They looked like they were about to swear an oath to prove their innocence. They weren't just saying that to save their lives. They were really scared. Who was Jin Buchuan? He was the adopted son of their chief eunuch. However, Yang Qindong killed him just like that. Although he didn't give Jin Buchuan a chance to prove his identity, no one would believe that the loyal duke didn't recognize Jin Buchuan's identity. Thinking about it, Lien Jinying's adopted son was killed without any hesitation. There was no room for reconciliation. What were they? He was just an ordinary person wearing the identity of an embroidered uniform guard. Perhaps this could be used to scare some ordinary people and officials, but if he wanted to scare the Duke of Loyal Heart, he could forget about it. None of them wanted to die. The 10 of them shook their heads in unison. Their words fell into Beta Persei's ears. He dug his ears as if he didn't hear them clearly. You don't have to be so loud. I've remembered what you said. Since you are so sensible, when you go back, persuade your other colleagues to try. My 4th brother's knife is very sharp. He can kill without spilling blood. Yes, please rest assured. When we go back, we will be honest people. We will also tell our friends to be good people. We definitely won't dare to cause trouble again. We won't dare. With today's lesson, who would want to be enemies with the Duke of Loyal Heart? Not only that, they would probably advise their friends to not get involved in this mess in the future. Jin Buchuan and Tong Lai were dead, but this matter wasn't over. Just as the 10 embroidered uniform guards were shaking their heads to express their determination, a black-armored soldier rushed up from downstairs. He didn't even look at the fallen embroidered uniform guards. His eyes were wide open. Jin Buchuan and Tong Lai's lifeless bodies didn't attract his attention either. He strode up to Beta Persei and whispered, "Big brother Beta Persei, a large group of embroidered uniform guards have arrived downstairs. They've already surrounded this place. Brothers, what should we do?" The newcomer was the captain of the first guard, Chiu Vi. As he spoke, he revealed an expression that suggested he was ready to fight. From the looks of it, he clearly didn't place the embroidered uniform guards outside the immortal abode in his eyes. In reality, the immortal abode was indeed under layers of protection. Not only were there 2 guards in the building ready to counterattack at any time, but they were also there. In the nearby streets, Commander Xiaofeng and the Cold Vanguard warriors were ready to fight at any time. It was true that the immortal abode belonged to Yang Qindong, but it was also located in the capital of Baiming. In a place like this, the slightest carelessness could lead to an irreparable mistake. For this reason, Yang Qindong had naturally made all the necessary arrangements, including a few backup plans. The so-called backup plans were Iron Tiger's Wolf Fong special forces hidden around the palace. As soon as the battle began, they would be prepared to bombard the palace. Although it would be difficult for them to charge into the palace with just a few dozen people, creating a huge commotion wouldn't be a problem. In fact, their goal was to scare the emperor into wetting his pants. Although this was a bit of an exaggeration, Zhu Qiu, who had never seen a real gun before, might really satisfy their demands. It was precisely because he had made all the necessary arrangements that Yang Qindong didn't show any mercy to Jin Buchuan and Tong Lai. One of them had sent an assassin like Shen Kuin to kill him, while the other had dared to disrespect his father-in-law and go to the Hu estate to capture him. The target of killing these 2 people was very obvious. At the same time, it was also a kind of demonstration. It was telling some people that they already knew what they were doing. Didn't they want to see their reaction? Then I'll kill them. What can you do about it? Just from this point alone, it was obvious that he was giving them a taste of their own medicine. As the saying went, it was impolite not to reciprocate. Since you captured Hu Zhongning, let's do the same and kill your men. Let's see who's the first to relent, who's the first to show weakness, and who's the fiercest. Back to Chiu Vi's excited request for battle, Beta Persei waved his hand. The young master said that this is the immortal abode. If we make a move here, the losses will be too great. The young master isn't one to make a loss. So, invite the embroidered uniform guards over and have them clean up the battlefield. That way, we won't dirty our brothers' hands with these corpses. Beta Persei spoke very casually, without any intention of suppressing his voice. Everyone present heard him clearly. The 10 embroidered uniform guards naturally looked down, as if they hadn't heard a thing. Dressed in black armor, Shibi's eyes were wide open at this moment, as if she was shocked. The 6th young master had already given him a rough idea of what was going on in the morning. However, he hadn't mentioned whether they would directly kill the embroidered uniform guards or not. Bei had thought that the 6th young master wanted to use this as a warning. He hadn't expected that the embroidered uniform guards would be killed just like that. Not only that, even though he knew that a large number of embroidered uniform guards had already appeared below, Beta Persei was still calm and unhurried, as if he were waiting for the enemy to arrive. What did this mean? He didn't believe that Beta Persei would be so magnanimous. That meant that the 6th young master had already planned for this. He was in the capital of the great Ming dynasty, yet he still didn't place the emperor in his eyes. Just this boldness alone was enough to make him unparalleled in the world. At this moment, Bei's admiration for Yang Qindong rose to another level. After Chou Wu received the order, he nodded and left. Not long after, a group of embroidered uniform guards came to the 3rd floor. When they saw the 10 embroidered uniform guards beaten black and blue, as well as the dead Jin Buchuan and Tong Lai, their faces burned with rage. The leader of the group had a dark expression. You dare to kill embroidered uniform guards in broad daylight. Your guts are truly heaven-defying. Men, arrest all of them. What kind of people were the embroidered uniform guards? They were the lackeys of the emperor. As long as they wanted to, they could charge into the homes of any subject without any evidence. As long as they wanted to, they could arrest the high and mighty court officials as criminals and punish them severely. For example, Wang Ji, the Minister of Appointments, who was known as the Heavenly Official, had also been imprisoned by the embroidered uniform guards, let alone others. Normally, anyone who dared to resist the embroidered uniform guards would be labeled as disgraceful. Killing a member of the embroidered uniform guards was even more disdainful, especially in such a public setting. How was this killing? This was clearly a provocation. The enraged leader of the embroidered uniform guards waved his hand and was about to give the order to arrest the culprits, but a voice soon followed. Why does this voice sound so familiar? I wonder which acquaintance is making a fuss in my immortal abode. How impressive! Impudent! When he heard that someone dared to question the general's orders, an unfathomable embroidered uniform guard shouted loudly. After which, he looked towards the private room in the private room. It was as if he would rush in at any moment as long as the order was given. Shut your mouth! The leader of the embroidered uniform guards shouted angrily. Of course, he wasn't rushing into the private room, but rather the subordinate who had just been shouting. With a shout, he stopped his subordinates from shouting. The leader then carefully looked in the direction of the private room and asked very cautiously, "Friend, your voice is a little familiar. Can you come out and meet me?" "Ji Guang, do you think your status is worthy?" A voice came from the private room. It wasn't loud, but it was deafening. At least, that was how the leader of the embroidered uniform guard saw it. The person who had come was none other than the leader of the embroidered uniform guards, Ji Guang. This was the person who had almost had his leg broken by Yang Qindong. Of course, that was a long time ago. Back then, he was still the leader of the embroidered uniform guards, a fourth-rank official. Now he'd been promoted to a third-rank official. Even though he'd been promoted, he still didn't have the slightest bit of confidence when facing Yang Qindong. On the contrary, that voice was like a nightmare to him. If it had to be said, in addition to revering the current Emperor Zhu Qiyu, he was afraid of Yang Qindong in this world. Chapter 800. He was afraid, because it was precisely this person who had almost taken his life. But after the incident, not only did he have to apologize, he also had to act as if he was completely willing to do so. How was this something an official of the embroidered uniform guard would do? From that moment on, he knew that there were always some people he couldn't afford to offend. Without a doubt, the Duke of Loyalty and Courage was one such person. At first, he felt that the voice in the private room sounded familiar. When he heard the other party call out his name, he knew that he wasn't hallucinating. The other party's identity had been confirmed beyond doubt. Since that was the case, how could he dare show the slightest bit of disrespect? He immediately did something that shocked the other embroidered uniform guards. "So it's the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. Ji Guang pays his respects to you." "Enough. There's no need for such formalities. Since you know that this Duke is here, go find someone who can keep his word. Otherwise, this Duke will return to the Yang clan manor in 2 hours. If there are any consequences, you all will have to bear them. You may leave." Not only did he refuse to see Ji Guang, but he also wanted to meet someone with more authority. He even set a time limit for the other party. In this world, the only person who could treat the embroidered uniform guards in such a vile manner was probably Yang Qindong. Logically speaking, this was equivalent to humiliating someone. No matter how capable and powerful you were, you still had to show your face, right? Was it really good to be so arrogant? Good, it really was good. At the very least, Ji Guang didn't find anything wrong with it. In fact, after knowing that the Duke of Loyalty and Courage was inside, he even extinguished any thoughts of meeting him. Since their statuses weren't equal, what was the point of meeting him? Was he trying to make things difficult for himself? Duke, please wait for a moment. This humble one will report this matter to the higher-ups. I believe that someone with more authority will come very quickly. Ji Guang was tactful. He clasped his hands and bowed. Then, without daring to look at the corpse on the ground, he turned around and left. Ji Guang came quickly and left even faster. After leaving the immortal abode, he personally rode his horse towards the nearby imperial palace. As he galloped, he almost knocked over a commoner who couldn't dodge in time. However, he didn't slow down at all. Within the imperial palace, Jining was waiting for news from outside. After obtaining Talu City for free, the Daizong Emperor left happily. He became a hands-off shopkeeper and left everything to himself. As Jining received her orders, she also summoned the commander of the Brocade Guards, Lu Gui. Together, they guarded the palace and waited for news. They didn't have to wait for long before Ji Guang appeared. When he saw the two people in front of him, he knelt on one knee and said, "Eunuch Jin, Commander, things aren't looking good." With a sigh, Ji Guang recounted everything that had happened in the immortal abode. Time was of the essence, and he didn't know much about the situation. He didn't even know why the two sides were in conflict. He was just telling them what he saw objectively. Of course, he couldn't forget Yang Qindong's following request. He had to give an answer within 2 hours, or he would leave. Jin Buchuan had actually died, and in the immortal abode at that. Jining was stunned when she heard the news. She immediately stood up from her chair and said with fire in her eyes, "They've gone too far. They've gone too far." Jining's reaction was within Ji Guang's expectations. No matter what, Jin Buchuan was still Jining's adopted son. Even though he hadn't been favored as much recently and had even been given the cold shoulder, his identity as her adopted son was not fake. Now, not only had he been killed, it had been done in front of everyone. Anyone in this situation would probably be furious. Jining was very angry, but neither Commander Lv Gui, who was standing at the side, nor Ji Guang, who was half kneeling there, expressed any opinions on this matter. From this point alone, one could roughly conclude that they would not express any opinions on this matter. Perhaps they were treating this as a family matter, or perhaps they were afraid of the Duke of Loyalty's authority. The two of them didn't say anything. After cursing for a while, Jining slowly closed her mouth. It wasn't easy to put on a one-man show, and she didn't want to lose her composure in front of these people. She forced herself to remain calm and asked Ji Guang, "Tell me, what do you think about this matter?" "Since you're not going to say anything, I'll force you to. This is one of the privileges of a superior." Ji Guang, who was called out, felt a bit annoyed, but he didn't show it on his face. Instead, he lowered his head again and said, "This kind of important matter is not something a lowly official like me can comment on." "That's right, Eunuch Jin. The Duke of Loyalty is still waiting for you in the immortal abode." He said that if he doesn't see anyone willing to talk to him within 2 hours, he'll go to the Yang clan manor. What? He wants to go back after killing our embroidered uniform guards? He's dreaming. Commander Liu, immediately mobilize the embroidered uniform guards and surround the immortal abode. This isn't the South, nor is it the Plains. I want to see just what kind of ability this Duke of Loyalty has. Jining turned to Lu Gui angrily, asking for his support. The great Ming dynasty's political system was made up of 3 main factions: the imperial power, the scholarly faction, and the eunuch faction. The lowest ranked eunuch faction had produced Wang Zhen at its peak. He was an existence that stood above tens of thousands of people, second only to the emperor. He was a perfect example of what it meant to be a petty person intoxicated by success. However, ever since the Tumu Castle incident and Wang Zhen's death, the eunuch faction suffered a heavy blow. Zhu Qiyu, who was waiting for the throne, seemed to have learned his lesson and didn't place too much importance on the eunuchs. In comparison, Jining, who was also the head eunuch, was far inferior to Wang Zhen. However, in the past year, the power of the eunuch faction had increased significantly. This was all because the scholarly faction had pushed them too hard. After Zhu Qiu ascended to the throne, he gave up on the inner court and distributed his power to the 6 ministers, then concentrated it all on himself. However, to become an important official in the court, which one of them wasn't smart? When faced with Zhu Qiu's methods of dividing power, they quickly began to work together in private. Some small matters were decided by themselves, and they didn't want to trouble the emperor if they could. This was what it meant to have policies from the top and countermeasures from the bottom. No matter what, the 6 ministers were the main representatives of the civil officials. For their own positions and the support of the other officials, they had no choice but to think of ways to divide power from the emperor. In order to keep them in check, although Zhu Qiu didn't want to, he still used the eunuch faction and began to increase their power in order to achieve a balance that was most beneficial to him. Because of this, Jin Ying's authority had increased a little in the past year. If it were in the past, LV Gui would have agreed immediately when he gave such a clear order. After all, Zhu Qiu trusted Jining a lot. If he didn't perform well, he would be replaced at any time. Not to mention, he was originally Jin Ying's man as the commander. However, this time he didn't agree immediately. Instead, he shook his head and asked carefully, "Eunuch Jin, this matter involves the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. Shouldn't we ask for the Emperor's permission? If a fight really breaks out and the Emperor questions us, I'm afraid we won't be able to keep our heads." Jin Ying hesitated for a moment. If it was someone else, perhaps he could overstep his authority. As long as it wasn't a big deal, it wouldn't matter even if the Emperor found out. However, the opponent was the Duke of Loyalty and Courage, which was completely different. This was someone who had the ability to compete with the embroidered uniform guards and even the Baiming army. Once this person was involved, a small matter would become a big matter. All right, this eunuch will go ask for the Emperor's permission now. After thinking about it, this matter involved a lot and was far from something he could make a decision on his own. In the end, Jining readily agreed to LV Gui's suggestion. After Jining finished speaking, he prepared to leave. However, at this moment, Ji Guang spoke up. "Eunuch Jin, the Duke of Loyalty and Courage, only gave us 2 hours. Do you think we should send someone to deal with him first and delay him?" When he thought about the time limit, Jining couldn't help but feel angry. However, when he thought about how Yang Qindong had publicly announced it, and if he really didn't arrive on time, it was hard to say what would happen. He could only sigh and say, "Forget it. Let's have Commander LV go first and delay him for a while." This wasn't a good task, and LV Gui didn't want to go. Just like how Ji Guang didn't want to face Yang Qindong, he had also suffered at his hands before. At the time, Yang Qindong had still been an official in the embroidered uniform guards and was still his subordinate in name. Not to mention that Yang Qindong had already conquered such a large territory. However, this was Jin Ying's request, and he couldn't refuse. He could only pinch his nose and agree. With LV Gui taking the lead, Ji Guang inwardly sighed in relief. Even if the sky fell, there were tall people to hold it up. He didn't need to worry as much anymore. LV Gui and Ji Guang left the imperial palace, but Commander LV still mobilized several hundred embroidered uniform guards to follow them to the immortal abode. This was clearly done out of a guilty conscience. He was worried that the Duke of Loyalty would try to kill him after seeing him. Since he'd already killed Jin Buchuan, he didn't seem to mind killing him as well. Reality proved that LV Gui's worries were unnecessary. When he brought Ji Guang to the 3rd floor of the immortal abode, Yang Qindong didn't even bother to meet him and just left him there. Clearly, he was reminding him that his status wasn't high enough. LV Gui didn't know whether to be happy or disappointed. However, not having to face the Duke of Loyalty was still a good thing. When Ji Guang said that there would be other important figures coming, they finally received Yang Qindong's permission to stay for a while longer. The two of them relaxed and began to investigate the whole situation. LV Gui arrived, and the 10 embroidered uniform guards who'd been beaten up finally regained their freedom. From their mouths, the two sirs were finally able to get a clear picture of what had happened. However, because they knew the reason, their expressions were bitter. Chapter 801. This Jin Buchuan really deserved to die. Not only did he just have to run right into Yang Qindong's gun, he even said that he wanted to exterminate his entire family. Just based on those words alone, killing them would have been pointless. Thinking about it, if things were that easy, wouldn't the emperor have done it long ago? His Majesty hadn't even said anything, yet you said something like that. What was the meaning of that? Those who didn't know better would think that the emperor had ordered this. Wouldn't the world fall into chaos then? LV Gue and Ji Guang shook their heads. They knew that Jin Buchuan deserved to die. They didn't say anything else. They just waited for Jining to appear. At that moment, Jining was on his way from the imperial palace to the immortal abode. Sitting in the palanquin, he had a displeased expression on his face. When he thought about Zhu Qiyu's reaction when he reported the matter to the emperor, he felt even more unconfident. Jin Ing reported everything to Zhu Qiyu. Zhu Qiyu's face was burning with anger, just as Jining was wondering if the emperor was going to be ruthless. Who would have thought that the emperor would suddenly change his mind? Since the Duke of Zhongdan wants to see an important person, then you should go. With your status, you should be able to speak with him. As for how you want to talk, you can make the decision. In any case, we can't lose the prestige of our Baiming. Face is a must. He was waiting for Jining to take full control of the situation. Zhu Qiyu had seen the danger in this matter and decided to stay out of it. If things went well, that was something he should do. After all, this matter had arisen because of his adopted son. If things didn't go well, then he would very likely be pushed out as a scapegoat. Jin Ing firmly believed in this point. Not only were there many ministers who disliked his position, but there were also many people who were eyeing him in the same group of eunuchs. It could be said that one wrong step could lead to a bottomless abyss. Knowing that he still had to clean up his own mess, Jining walked out of the inner palace with a submissive expression. Then he hurried in the direction of the immortal abode. Finally, just as Yang Qindong seemed to be getting impatient, he arrived. LV Gue and Ji Guang, who were waiting for him on the other side, breathed a sigh of relief and hurriedly told him all the information they had just found out. Initially, Jining was prepared to enter the private room to meet Yang Qindong. However, when she heard the report from her two subordinates, she stopped. When she heard more and more information, her expression turned ugly. He hadn't expected that this normally quick-witted adopted son of his would be so stupid. His investigation of the Mongolian spies actually led him to the immortal abode and coincidentally ended up in Yang Qindong's room. What was even more unexpected was that he actually said that he wanted to exterminate the 9 generations of the other party's family. Did he not know what kind of situation it was right now? Hu Zhangning had already been captured and thrown into the imperial prison. This was a crucial moment in the struggle. Any signal released by his every move would be infinitely amplified. If he did not do it well, it might even cause the earth to shake. However, even a smart person would remain silent at this moment. Jining, on the other hand, had taken the initiative to come here and shout about killing. Those in the know would be able to tell that this was a coincidence, but those who didn't would think that all of this had been taught to them by their adopted father. It was no wonder that Yang Qindong had killed him on the spot. This was a matter of protecting one's dignity. If Yang Qindong had ignored all of this and instead backed down, then that would have been a sign of weakness. If that had happened, then he would have really been bullied. Jin Ing finally understood the whole story. She had a lot more plans in her mind. Just from Yang Qindong's behavior, it seemed like he had no intention of starting a fight. Even though he had killed someone, he had no other choice. With this kind of bottom line, Jin Ying's heart was greatly comforted. After obtaining so much useful information, Jining didn't hate Jin Buchuan as much anymore. His death could at least be considered to have helped her, allowing her to get a better understanding of the other party's background. All right, I understand. The price of this kind of probing action is still too high. These words from Jin Ying's mouth were equivalent to defining the situation. In this way, even if Jin Buchuan didn't do anything, he couldn't be considered to have done anything wrong. This would also be beneficial to his relatives who were still alive. What kind of people were LV Gue and Ji Guang? They were people who were used to seeing battles and life and death. With just this one sentence, they had already heard too much useful information. At once they agreed and said, yes, yes. Jin Buchuan used his death to test the waters. It can indeed be considered a worthy death. Seeing that her two subordinates understood her meaning, Jin Ying nodded her head in satisfaction. Then she took large strides and leaped over the bodies of Jin Buchuan and Tong Lai on the ground. She came to the side of the door and said, Jin Ying has come on the Emperor's orders. Please come to see the Duke of Loyalty. Not long after, Yang Qindong's not very loud voice finally came from inside. Come in. Following this sound, Jin Ying pushed open the door and entered. Then the inner door closed. Everything was as if it had never been opened. At this moment, only Yang Qindong was left in the inner room. His two wives and personal maids had already entered the inner room to rest temporarily. The treatment of the Sky Room was similar to the treatment of the president in the future. Yang Qindong sat in front of a small table. There was only a chair in front of him. When he saw Jin Ying, who was no longer young, walk in, he only raised his eyelids and casually pointed at the chair opposite him. You're here. Please take a seat. The king would not meet the king. This saying had been around for a long time. If they had to meet, it would have to be a time when life and death would be determined. Therefore, Yang Qindong could understand Zhu Qiu. Jin Ying's appearance was something to be expected. Moreover, it seemed that only this person could make decisions on important matters. When faced with this problem, even some important ministers couldn't do it. Thank you, Duke of Loyalty. As the favorite of the emperor, Chief Steward Jin Ying was indeed very low-key. At the very least, he was not as arrogant as Wang Jin had been. Perhaps he also wanted to, but when he knew the identity of the person he was facing, it was best to dispel such thoughts. Jin Ying sat down and exchanged some pleasantries. Then the two of them chatted like old friends. Although there was a smile on their faces, the words that came out of their mouths had nothing to do with friendship or courtesy. Jin Ying asked, Why did you come back? Yang Qindong replied, The two madams here made me worry, so I had to take them away. Is that all? Jin Ying continued to ask, What else do you think? Or if I had someone else do this, would you have agreed? Jin Ying asked, That's not very good, is it? All the important ministers have their families in the capital. You've already taken two madams, so leave these two behind. At this point, Yang Qindong slowly raised his head. A bright light flashed in his eyes as he said in an incomparably firm tone, This should be my family's matter. Besides, how can those ordinary officials be compared to me? I just took down Talicity and was preparing to give it to His Majesty. Do they have this ability? Or are you saying that you don't want it anymore? Yang Qindong proposed a condition. He wanted to take his two madams away, and in exchange he would give Talicity as a gift of thanks. But these words caused Jin Ying's face to twist into a nasty grimace. News of Talicity had already been released, and even the emperor had issued a decree telling the officials and common people that Yang Qindong had taken down Talicity on his orders. That place was now Bai Ming's territory, and the entire country was celebrating. And if something unexpected were to happen, how would the emperor explain it to everyone? More importantly, everyone believed that this city belonged to Bai Ming. Now that it was under Yang Qindong's personal possession, what would outsiders think of this matter? Wouldn't this be the same as telling outsiders that the Duke of Loyal and Bold was rebelling? If that really was the case, they would have no choice but to fight. This was how important Talicity was. It had not been this important before, and all of this had just been facilitated. and this news had been released by Yang Qindong. From this, one could see that all of this had been planned long ago. And from this, one could see just how determined he was to take his madams away. It was impossible to change his mind. Jin Ing quickly saw through all of this, but even so, he still wanted to test the waters. After all, once the madams were no longer in Bai Ming's capital, there would be nothing left to restrain Yang Qindong. This was extremely disadvantageous to them. Thus he softly asked, "Then what if His Majesty doesn't agree?" "Ha ha." In return, Yang Qindong laughed coldly. However, it was this kind of laughter that made Jining feel increasingly uncomfortable in her heart every time it rang out. Fortunately, not long after, Yang Qindong said, "This is truly strange. I want to take my madams away, so this should be a family matter. Do you want to interfere?" "Of course, if you answer yes, then given my stubborn personality, I really do want to try." As he spoke, Yang Qindong raised his eyes to look at Jining. Then his fingers suddenly fell on the wooden table between the two of them, and he began to tap rhythmically. Dang, dang, dang. The frequency of his tapping was very slow, but with each tap, Jin Ying's expression turned even more unsightly. At that moment, Yang Qindong seemed unfathomable in front of him. Every finger seemed to serve as a warning. It made Jining feel as if he had been born on the battlefield, as if he had been born in a battle between the 1,000-blade army and the horse army. This sort of repressed emotion was impossible to stop once it appeared, and Jin Ying's expression grew even more unsightly. As the mental pressure mounted, he finally couldn't help but say something to ease the atmosphere. "The Duke of Loyal and Bold is a pillar of the country. His Majesty is thinking about the safety of your family, isn't he?" Chapter 802. Jin Ing could choose not to say these things. He could even stand up and leave. He believed that Yang Qindong would not stop him. After all, he was just a chief eunuch. Not only would killing him not have any effect, it would also force the emperor to act against him. But in the end, he did not choose to do so. This was because he knew that Bai Ming already had many enemies. In the south, there was Zhu Qijin from the Ing sect, and in the north, there was the powerful Walla army. If he were to openly fight with loyalty, his opponent would definitely be happy to see it happen. And even if he defeated Yang Qindong in the end, so what? He would have to sacrifice 800 of his own men to kill 1,000 of his enemies. When that time came, would they be able to stop the unharmed Bai Ming and Walla? Of course, Jining did not know that if they were to fight, he would be the one to lose. Yang Qindong was known as the god of war. How could he not be prepared to do something that would anger the southern Ming Empire? Putting aside the fact that there was already a regiment led by Xiaofeng in the capital to provide support at any time, with their strong military quality and excellent weapons and equipment, they would be able to hold out for a period of time. If something were to happen here, a telegram would be sent to Tiger's Mane in the first city, and tens of thousands of elite cavalry would descend from Tulu City. They would first attack the Xian Mansion and then take Jiong Pass. At that time, it would not be difficult for them to carry out a coup d'etat. This was where Yang Qindong's confidence came from. So-called negotiations might require a certain amount of psychological tactics, but in the end, it still depended on who was stronger. If one did not have enough strength, even if one had a glib tongue, what could they do? They would only be able to delay for a period of time. Yang Qindong was gambling. He was gambling that Zhu Qiyu was a smart person and would not think of starting a war with him first. Just like himself, he didn't want to make an enemy out of Bai Ming. After all, with the first city, it meant that he had formed a certain amount of power in the Mongolian territory. Once he went to war with Bai Ming and faced an army of millions. Even if he won, it would be a Pyrrhic victory. He might even be attacked by the grassland tribes and even the southern Ming Empire. If that happened, everything that he had done in the grassland for the past year might go up in smoke. As someone whose dream was to lead the Han people to the top of the world, one could imagine how precious time was. Furthermore, without sufficient military strength and manpower, Even if Bai Ming were to surrender, he would not be able to replan this place. Since that was the case, it was better to put it aside for now. Rather than forcing himself to eat a piece of fatty meat that was much bigger than himself and causing indigestion, it was better not to eat it and continue to recuperate. Bai Ming's existence could also help him share some of the firepower from southern Ming and Walla. Both sides had the same idea. Neither of them wanted to start a war. This was the condition that the two of them could sit down and talk. Yang Qindong immediately mentioned that he wanted to take his wives away. This was to use his power to suppress others. This was also the basic point of negotiation. If they didn't even have this consensus, there was naturally no need for other people to negotiate. Fortunately, Jining had met Zhu Qiyu before coming and guessed what Yang Qindong would say, and even what kind of request he would make. The two wives' departure was also within their expectations. In ancient times, the status of women was very low. Even if they left the two wives behind, could they guarantee that they would not join Bai Ming in a fight when Yang Qindong was powerful? In ancient times, when there were wars, not to mention concubines, even when one's own son was in the hands of the other party, both sides would suddenly start fighting. Was there a lack of such things? Just from this point alone, if Qiaoyin and Lady Xiang really thought that they could restrain Yang Qindong, that would be even more ridiculous. In the end, Jining was still so agitated even though she knew all this. In the end, she was just testing him. From the looks of it, the test had been very successful. Yang Qindong's determination to win gave Jining the idea that the other party still had a trump card. As for how the negotiations would proceed from here on out, Jining had even more plans in his mind. If the two wives insist on leaving with the Duke of Loyalty, then what about the Immortal Abode and Outer Heaven Trading Company? Our Bai Ming is vast and has abundant resources. We can make quite a bit of money here. Jining didn't continue to harp on the matter of the wives. Instead, his gaze fell on these profitable businesses. Ever since Yang Qindong left Bai Ming in the spring of last year and returned to Jianing Manor in the south to pay respects to his ancestors, he'd promised to give Zhu Qiyu 20% of the shares in these two businesses. This was something that couldn't be helped. If one wanted to establish a foothold in other people's territory, one couldn't obtain protection without paying a certain price. This was also why Bai Ming had turned a blind eye to Yang Qindong's strength, even though they knew that Yang Qindong's strength was constantly growing. There were even quite a few pieces of information that proved that the so-called mercenary leader was a fake, and that Yang Qindong really was in charge of everything. This was precisely because of the benefits involved. The current Bai Ming could already be described as militaristic. For the sake of increasing their military strength, they were constantly training new soldiers and manufacturing new firearms. They even had an artillery battalion. The construction of all these things required money. In addition, the great Ming dynasty was originally rich in the south and poor in the north. Bai Ming's establishment had already taken away too much of the benefits. If one really wanted to rely on Bai Ming's tax revenue to accomplish these things, it would be no different from a fool's dream. However, Zhu Qiyu had still managed to do it, and he'd done quite well at that. Wasn't it precisely because of the income these two businesses brought to the imperial court? Not to mention the Immortal Abode. Even if business was good, it was impossible for a restaurant to bring in that much income. However, just the realm beyond Heaven Trading Company alone brought in over 1 million taels of silver every month. 20% was 200,000 taels of silver. That was more than 3 million taels of silver in a year. This was definitely a number that couldn't be ignored. It was also the source of Zhu Qiyu's confidence. The two wives could leave, but the businesses definitely couldn't be let go. Otherwise, if they really started to fight, it would be disastrous. Under Jinying's nervous expression, Yang Qindong lightly nodded and said, "The businesses won't be touched. Not only that, but I will also increase the flow of business here. If the mercenaries want to establish themselves in the grasslands, they will need more logistical supplies. After all, New is still a bit too far from the capital. If possible, it would be better to transport goods through the capital. This way, Bai Ming's monthly income will be much higher. Transporting military supplies from Bai Ming to the front lines was a good way to quickly strengthen the mercenaries in the beginning city. Logically speaking, Zhu Qiyu and the imperial court of Bai Ming didn't want to see them become stronger because of this. However, the problem now was that Bai Ming's military expenditure mainly came from Yang Qindong's business tax. Even if they knew everything, they couldn't refuse. This was an open and above-board scheme. This was like building a highway and wanting to collect tolls. Then, more cars would need to travel on this road. Even if they knew that they would receive more benefits by transporting goods on this road, not only could they not stop them, they even had to warmly welcome them. Yes, I will ask the emperor to make a decision on this matter. Although Jining knew that Zhu Qiyu would definitely agree, she still said this prudently. Don't worry, the emperor will agree. I have already thought about it. In order to express the goodwill of the mercenaries, I will lend Bai Ming 520,000 taels of silver. You don't have to pay back a single cent for the first 5 years. Starting from the 6th year, you just have to pay it back in 5 years. Yang Qindong's face was full of confidence as he threw out another big bomb. It was said that money could make even the devil turn millstones. This move was the same even for the emperor of Bai Ming. As expected, when these words were said, Jin Ying's entire body trembled and her eyes lit up. Really? Yes. Yang Qindong nodded happily. Then he looked at Jining and said, I have shown you my sincerity. I wonder what eunuch Jin will tell me. This meant that they were going to discuss conditions, or even make a deal. Jin only hesitated for a moment before immediately replying, Since Duke Zhongdan is so generous, this eunuch will meet with the emperor when I return. I will definitely give Duke Zhongdan an explanation on some matters. Ha ha! The two of them seemed to laugh at the same time. They knew that no matter what would happen in the future, at the moment, they had already formed an alliance. Next, the two of them talked in the private room for more than 2 hours. It was only when the sky outside was about to turn dark that Jining stood up and said goodbye. Today's meeting had been to exchange opinions on the general direction of some matters. Next, there would be a professional to discuss this matter. Then it would be recorded. At that time, it would become a kind of rule that would be enforced. The imperial palace. Jining had been gone for nearly 6 hours, and the sky was gradually darkening. The lanterns of the imperial palace had already been lit, but there was still no news. As the emperor, Zhu Qiyu paced back and forth in the main hall, an anxious look on his face. His so-called composure had already vanished. Just what is this eunuch Jin trying to do? He couldn't have done anything to Jining, right? Does he really dare to start a war with us in our capital? As countless thoughts ran through his mind, Zhu Qiyu's complexion grew more and more unsightly. The eunuchs serving him all stood far away, afraid that someone would say the wrong thing and incur the emperor's displeasure. Fortunately, there was finally some movement outside the hall. A eunuch hastily rushed into the hall and prostrated himself on the ground. Your Majesty, eunuch Jin has returned. Quickly bring him to see us. Upon hearing that Jining had returned, Zhu Qiyu's expression relaxed. Although he didn't know why he had been gone for so long, there was one thing that he didn't need to worry about. There was no need for him to clash with Yang Qindong in the short term. In contrast to Zhu Qiyu's worry and anxiety, Yang Qindong was natural and unrestrained, steadily walking out of the immortal abode. He then sat down in a large carriage that could defend against arrows and spears, and under the protection of the 1st Black Cavalry, he made his way to the Hu estate. Chapter 803. Since he was going to his father-in-law's residence, he obviously couldn't bring his other wives with him. Xiaoyin and Lady Xiang were both arranged to stay in the immortal abode. Every night there would be a variety of performances, allowing the two women to enjoy themselves. As for himself, there were still many things he needed to do. Although there had been a murder case in the immortal abode, countless people had seen how courteous Jining was when she left with the embroidered uniform guards. When they learned that the immortal abode was fine even after killing the embroidered uniform guards, the customers who came here felt even more relieved, and the number of customers increased. Tonight, the immortal abode was bound to be incomparably lively. Similarly, the Hu estate was also bustling. Hu Zhongning had already been taken away for 7 or 8 days. Apart from knowing that he was locked up in the imperial prison and hadn't been tortured yet, he didn't know anything else. His own son had been taken away by the embroidered uniform guards and imprisoned. As the father, Hu Shao appeared calm and composed, but his heart was filled with anxiety. It had only been a few days, but the bustling Hu estate had suddenly calmed down. Not a single official came to pay their respects. This was the reality. Although it wasn't to the point where everyone would kick a man who was down. Once the embroidered uniform guards came to an end, there would be many who would take the opportunity to deal with the Hu clan. Hu Shao had been an official for many years and had seen all kinds of situations. He was still able to keep his composure. In contrast, his wife, Hu Wangshi, and daughter-in-law, Hu Yushi, who were also Hu Yan's mother and grandmother, couldn't keep their composure. They pestered him every day, asking him all sorts of questions, all about when Hu Zhongning would return. At first, Hu Shao would respond with a few words, but as time went on, he stopped talking altogether. Instead, he instructed the housekeeper to keep an eye on his 2 wives, telling them to stay in their rooms and not to leave unless absolutely necessary. Although it was quiet now, this was only temporary. As long as Hu Zhongning wasn't released, the matter wasn't over yet. He could become the substitute emperor's target at any time, or even be the one to be executed. Hu Shao had also thought of counterattacking, but when the embroidered uniform guards appeared and attacked only the Hu clan, everyone else showed an attitude of self-preservation. This made it difficult for him to find an ally. It would be difficult to rely on himself to accomplish anything. This matter also allowed Hu Shao to see more people's true colors. Although he had been in the government for decades, he had seen many such things. But when it was his turn, he still felt a chill in his heart. However, at that moment, he received news that the Duke of Loyalty had returned to Yang Village. In the past, when Yang Qindong returned, Hu Ming would only worry that his grandson-in-law was in danger. But now, all he had was hope. After all, he had already returned and could not be chased away. Perhaps his appearance could save his son. In Hu Zhao's expectation, Yang Qindong made his move on the 2nd day after his return. One of the embroidered uniform guards had actually died in the immortal abode. The one who died was the adopted son of the head eunuch, Jining, a Baihu. Coincidentally, that Baihu was the one who had taken Hu Zhongning away from the Hu estate a few days ago. After everything that had happened, Hu Chang couldn't help but feel hopeful. He had a feeling that this time, Yang Qindong was building momentum for the Hu clan and also looking for interest for the Hu clan. Didn't he have the ability to take away his father-in-law? Then he would do something even more ruthless. He would kill him directly in front of so many people. This method was a little extreme, but it was undeniably effective. With this experience, if anyone wanted to harm the Hu clan in the future, they would have to consider Yang Qindong's reaction. They would also have to touch their own necks to see if they were still there. Reporting. When the lanterns were lit and Hu Shao was about to eat dinner, the steward suddenly reported that the Duke of Loyalty had come to pay a visit. The Duke of Loyalty. A hint of surprise flashed across Hu Zhao's face. Although he knew that after Yang Qindong returned to the capital as his grandson-in-law, he would have to pay a visit to the Hu estate, he hadn't expected it to be so soon. He waved his hand and said, "Please." There was no time to think too much. Hu Shao got up and looked outside the door. Soon, Yang Qindong's tall figure appeared in his line of sight, and a group of black-armored soldiers appeared with him. Because of the iron armor covering their faces, no one could see their faces clearly, but the powerful murderous aura emanating from their bodies could be felt from far away. This was definitely a group of veterans who had experienced hundreds of battles and killed countless people. Otherwise, they would never exude such a powerful, murderous aura. When they could see Hu Shao from afar, Yang Qindong had Beta Persei, and the others stop. All of you wait here. This was the Hu estate, the residence of the first Madam, Hu Yan. Of course, he wouldn't let his subordinates scare the people here. After giving the order, he hurriedly took a few steps forward with a smile on his face and went straight to Hu Shao, who was standing there. Haha, this old man welcomes the Duke of Loyalty. Seeing that Yang Qindong was so sensible and hurried over to him, Hu Shao revealed a long-lost smile on his face. From this point alone, it could be seen that the other party's attitude towards him was still very respectful. At least, it didn't change because of the change in his status. Grandfather, you mustn't say that. It's really too much for Qindong. Since he had married Hu Yan, it meant that he had acknowledged everything about her. Now that he saw the first madam's grandfather, he naturally had to greet him as a junior. Haha, let's go inside and talk. When Hu Shao heard how Yang Qindong addressed him, his face was filled with joy. He immediately stretched out his hand and pulled Yang Qindong's arm, laughing as they walked into the inner hall. Since Yang Qindong dared to appear in the Hu estate at this time, he must have known what had happened outside, and some of the troubles had even been resolved. This was Hu Zhao's confidence in Yang Qindong. If he hadn't done this, his grandson-in-law would never have rashly visited the Hu estate. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a visit, but a shift in the blame. When all the servants had left, leaving only Yang Qindong and Hu Shao in the inner hall, the old man asked, I heard that an embroidered uniform guard caused trouble in the immortal abode today, and they were even killed. Seeing Hu Zhao's questioning gaze, Yang Qindong nodded. There was indeed such a matter. In the end, eunuch Jining also came. The facts also proved that it was all a misunderstanding. With a smile, Yang Qindong recounted everything that had happened that afternoon to Hu Shao. Yang Qindong still respected Hu Shao from the bottom of his heart. This wasn't just because he was Hu Yan's grandfather. It was also because he was one of the leaders of the landowning clans, and because he was a true master of literature. Regardless of whether it was in his previous life or this one, Yang Qindong had always respected scholars. Wasn't the progress of society the result of these scholars' continuous efforts? In addition, Hu Shao had been an official for so many years. He could be said to have lived in the same era as Yang Qindong's late father, Yang Rong. When it came to political wisdom, ordinary people couldn't compare to him. Perhaps he might be able to reap some benefits if he reported this matter to him. Hu Bazwa listened quietly, his expression changing from time to time. When he heard that Yang Qindong wanted to lend 5 million taels of silver to the southern Ming dynasty, as well as that he would use this place as a transit point to transport military supplies to the mercenaries in the grasslands, he was first surprised, then slowly nodded. This move seemed like an act of borrowing, but it was actually a declaration of sovereignty. He wanted to tell the Bai Ming dynasty that the mercenaries had already established themselves in the grasslands. Once the Bai Ming dynasty agreed to this request, it would be equivalent to them acknowledging the mercenaries' actions in the grasslands. Although it wasn't completely legal, it was at least reasonable. Both sides didn't say it clearly, but once the matter was approved, the corresponding results would naturally come out. From this point alone, Yang Qindong's 5 million taels of silver was well spent. At the very least, it showed that Yang Qindong's awareness of the overall situation was very strong. How big is this mercenary army now? After listening to Yang Qindong's explanation, Hu Shao thought about it again and finally asked this question. In fact, it wasn't just him. Even the Bai Ming dynasty, the emperor of the southern Ming dynasty, and the ministers were very concerned about this matter. It was just that the mercenaries' secrecy was too good, so outsiders had no way of knowing. However, there was a saying that everyone agreed on. That was, the mercenaries must have a huge base on the sea. Otherwise, how could these endless mercenaries be explained? How could they explain the firearms and excellent weapons in their hands? After asking this question, Hu Shao stared at Yang Qindong. Facing such a gaze, Yang Qindong only chuckled and then answered. If this question was asked by someone else, I naturally wouldn't answer. But if grandfather asked this question, I will directly answer it. Your seat is stable. This old man's seat is stable. Hu Shao actually cooperated and said the sentence. Ha ha ha. Yang Qindong, who was laughing loudly, only said one sentence under Hu Zhao's serious expression. It's enough to destroy northern Ming. What? Even though Hu Shao was mentally prepared, after hearing this answer, his body couldn't help but tremble. He thought that the mercenaries should be very strong. Otherwise, they wouldn't have sent troops to the grasslands after taking down the two small countries, Jiaoji and Lancang. But at that time, whether it was Jiaoji or Lancang or even the two vast regions of the southern Ming dynasty, they were all considered barren lands. There really weren't any good resources there for people to fight over. For such an unimportant place, if they took it, they would fight. It didn't mean that they had to pay a huge price or have a lot of strength. But now that he heard Yang Qindong's answer, Hu Shao knew that he was too careful and thought that the mercenaries were too weak. They actually had the strength to destroy the northern Ming dynasty. Didn't that mean that they were so powerful that no one dared to imagine it? Chapter 804. The shocked Hu Shao did not think that Yang Qindong would joke about such a thing, especially in such a private setting. If he really was bragging, there was no benefit in doing so. Could it be that he, as a grandfather, would flatter him? Since he could not, the correct answer was to tell the truth. Hu Zhao's face was filled with shock. All of this was within Yang Qindong's expectations. With the strength of the mercenaries, if they only chose Ming as their enemy, it would not be arrogant to say that they could take them down. It was just that due to various reasons and the conditions were not ripe, he would not do so. However, he still said such a thing to tell Hu Shao one thing, which was the true strength of the mercenaries. With this kind of support, he would not have to be so careful in the future. Of course, Yang Qindong had another thought. He had been away for a long time and could not return to the palace to accompany his wife, Hu Yan. However, if he could move her family over, she would be very happy. Taking this opportunity, he said tentatively, "Grandfather, I won't hide it from you. The mercenaries have a base on the sea. It is very rich and the climate is pleasant. It is a good place to spend your old age. If grandfather agrees, I will immediately arrange for people to send your family there. In the future, you will not have to worry about any dangerous situations." As mentioned before, many people suspected that the mercenaries had a base on the sea. However, that was only a guess without any evidence. However, now that Yang Qindong had taken the initiative to admit it and even invited him, Hu Shao was somewhat moved. This great Ming was not the same great Ming. Especially after the separation of the North and South, Hu Shao only felt that his days were not as good as before. The original strategy of ruling the world through literature was changing to ruling the country through military might. Whether it was Ming or Southern Ming, if they wanted to unify the country, they would inevitably have to fight a big battle. As such, the position of a civil official was not as important. At this time, if Hu Shao chose to leave, it would be the best time. At least, he would not have to worry about the pain of war. It was just that this kind of feeling was nothing more than a passing thought in his mind so that it would disappear. Although Hu Shao was almost 70 years old, his body was still very strong. In his own words, he could still work for a few more years. Now that he had agreed to Yang Qindong's request, it was not impossible. However, if he went there, he would only have one identity, Hu Yan's grandfather. If that was the case, it would not be the path he was pursuing. What he wanted was for others to see him in a different light. What he needed was to lay a good foundation for the Hu clan. He was keenly aware of Yang Qindong's great ambition. This person was only in his early 20s, but he had already found such a great foundation. His future could only be described as limitless. Then, As the first madam's maternal family, they should not only eat their fill, but also use this opportunity to do something. Perhaps in the future, the Hu family would have a bright future. All of a sudden, a path was laid out in front of him. Whether it was more vast or ordinary, everything depended on a single thought from him. Thus, Hu Shao quickly made a decision. He would work hard and fight for a better future for the Hu clan's descendants. After making a decision in his heart, Hu Shao looked at Yang Qindong and shook his head gently. Then he asked with a smile, "Duke of Loyalty, you don't think this old man is old, right? Let me tell you, I will work for a few more years. There is no problem at all. Besides, this place will become your army's supply line in the future. You will need someone to help you keep an eye on this place." Hu Shao rejected his suggestion and made the decision to work for the mercenaries. This made Yang Qindong a little surprised. He sighed in his heart that smart people were indeed smart people who knew how to maximize their own interests at the same time. He nodded. "Then I will leave it to you, grandfather." Hu Zhao's attitude suddenly changed. Speaking of which, this was not a one-time thing. Ever since the Tumu Rebellion, the great Ming dynasty was divided into north and south, and it became harder and harder to be an official. With the decline of the country and the rise of martial arts, Hu Shao, as the Minister of Rights, lost his former glory. Thinking about how glorious the great Ming dynasty was in the past, there were many vassal states. As the Minister of Rights, he had to do countless things every year. But now, other than Korea, who would not send people to buy Ming, no other country would put them in their eyes. Not only that, but the situation in the country was not good either. In the past, private schools were everywhere, and there were as many scholars as there were hairs on a cow. But now, the entire country was in an environment of military preparations. Scholars were not as popular as before, and there were not many things for him to worry about as the Minister of Rights. He only had to provide some services for the royal family during festivals. After being the Minister of Rights for so many years, this was something that Hu Shao had never experienced before. As such, he had long considered resigning. If not for the sake of his child, he didn't know where he should go after resigning. After all, the unrest in the world wasn't just limited to the northern Ming capital. The southern Ming capital wasn't faring well either. If he really did resign, he would probably go into seclusion. But now he finally had a new goal, or perhaps a direction to strive for. That was to help this grandson-in-law of his build a better foundation for the future Hu clan. As if suddenly thinking of something, Hu Shao looked at Yang Qindong with bright eyes and asked, "When you spoke with Jining, did you talk about your coronation?" "No." Yang Qindong shook his head. In the past, when he was working for the southern Ming Empire, he had mentioned that he wanted the throne. However, it had been delayed, so he didn't mention it anymore. In any case, it didn't matter to him whether he had the title of prince or not. The mercenaries wouldn't disobey his commands because of this reason. Seeing that Yang Qindong did not seem to care, Hu Shao earnestly shook his head. No. A title is still very important. At the very least, in terms of righteousness, we cannot lose out. Understanding the meaning behind Hu Zhao's words, Yang Qindong thoughtfully thought for a moment before nodding. "Fine. Since that's the case, I'll bring it up again when I negotiate with them, but they probably won't agree." A king with a different surname was a taboo in the great Ming dynasty. Besides the founding of the dynasty, no other king with the surname Zhu had been conferred. Of course, the Mu clan was an accident, but in the end, it was because they were too weak and their influence was limited to one area. So what if they were conferred a title? Yang Qindong was different. He was already very powerful, and if he was given a title, it would truly be difficult to control him. It's fine. Whether or not we can agree is one thing, but whether or not we want to is another. At the very least, we have to make our request known. Once the time is right, we will have the foundation and confidence to succeed, Hu Chang said with a thoughtful look on his face. Since he had decided to support this grandson-in-law, he would naturally tell them everything he knew. "Okay, I understand." Yang Qindong also nodded very seriously. Hu Xiao was right. Whether the other party agreed or not, and whether he made a request or not, were two different things. The only thing he needed to fight for now was to lay the foundation for him to obtain the throne openly in the future. While the grandfather and grandson were still chatting, the Hu estate's courtyard was already bustling with noise and excitement. Hu Zhongning had returned, and he had returned safe and sound. However, the Baihu behind him, Gao Sheng, was still somewhat weak. Compared to Hu Zhongning's status, Gao Sheng's Baihu was nothing. He had suffered a lot in the imperial prison, but he was still a man. He did not speak a word about the Hu clan, which allowed him to return with Hu Zhongning. When his mother, Hu Wangshi, and his wife, Hu Yushi, received the news, they were naturally filled with joy. Hu Xiao was much more reserved. Yang Qindong had just said that he had mentioned Hu Zhongning's matter during the negotiation with Jining. The other party had also agreed to release him quickly. Now, it seemed that their actions were quite nimble. Thinking about it, if they wanted to win Yang Qindong's financial support, if they were slow, it would only cause trouble for both sides. Hu Zhongning's return made the Hu clan very lively. At this time, Yang Qindong left the Hu estate and entered the large sedan. However, few people knew that as soon as he entered, Yang Qindong had already left the sedan on a deserted street. Under the cover of the night, he reported to Yang San, who was waiting at the corner of the street, and rushed straight to a heavily guarded military camp in the west of the city. Yang Qindong had gone in the middle of the night, and he had even concealed himself. Naturally, he was up to something big. In truth, the place he was heading to was an extremely secret place, the Great Ming's artillery camp. During the defense of the capital, Yang Qindong had used his authority at the time to befriend a few Bai Ming generals. One of them was Yang Guang, the great Ming general in charge of the artillery camp. After witnessing the power of the mercenaries' cannons, the Bai Ming imperial court had invested a great deal of manpower and resources into researching firearms. After 2 years of hard work, they had finally succeeded in developing a new type of cannon. As the general directly in charge of the artillery camp, Yang Guang had naturally informed Yang Qindong of this news through a spy in the security bureau. This was also one of the main reasons he had returned to the capital of Bai Ming, coming in the middle of the night and in the middle of the day when he had just killed the embroidered uniform guard and caused a storm in the city. No one had expected him to go through so much trouble. What Yang Qindong wanted to do was to attack everywhere with this thought in mind. Others would think that he would not obediently return to the Yang clan manor and wait for news from the emperor, but he would not. Doing the opposite was the safest way. At the corner of the street, Yang San had already prepared a Bai Ming soldier's uniform that suited Yang Qindong's figure. Then, Yang San accompanied Yang Qindong to the artillery camp. Chapter 805. Yang Guang, who had received the news early in the morning, was waiting outside the camp. When he saw Yang Qindong, he nodded without any change in his expression. Then, without even looking at Yang Qindong, he turned around and walked into the camp. Artillery General Yang Guang wanted to go back to the camp to check, so he only brought 2 bodyguards with him. Naturally, no one would be blind enough to come and check. Moreover, Yang Guang was very careful. When he knew that Yang Qindong was coming, he had already replaced the guards here with his own people. Naturally, no one would come to check. After entering the artillery camp, Yang Guang turned around and knelt in front of Yang Qindong. He lowered his head and said respectfully, "Yang Guang greets the 6th young master. Get up." Yang Qindong reached out and helped him up. Then he looked at Yang Guang seriously and smiled. "Not bad. Your body is stronger than before." "Very good. It's all thanks to the 6th young master." Yang Guang cupped his hands and said sincerely, this was not a perfunctory remark, nor was it a polite remark. Ever since he became the general of the artillery camp, he had received too much care from Yang Qindong, not to mention the silver that the security bureau gave him every month, which was enough for him to live a better life. Just with the care of the Minister of Justice, Su Yozhin, his position in the army soared. He no longer had to be careful in everything he did and look at other people's faces like before. It could be said that without Yang Qindong's care, he would not be where he was today. Since ancient times, there was a saying that if you take someone's money, you have to do things for them. At this moment, Yang Guang completely regarded himself as Yang Qindong's subordinate. Okay, we don't have to be so polite before. Bring me to see the cannons. Yang Qindong's time was tight. It was impossible for him to not show up for a long time. He was afraid that it would arouse suspicion. Yang Guang also knew that the Duke of Loyalty was busy with important matters, and his time was precious. He nodded and led the way while pointing to the front and said, "There are a few new cannons there that haven't been stored yet. Duke of Loyalty can take a look." In fact, these cannons were supposed to be sent to the warehouse. If Yang Qindong hadn't told his superiors that he wanted to check them carefully for fear of any accidents, he wouldn't have been able to see these things. It was placed in a huge warehouse. Several pitch-black cannons were lying there quietly under red cloth. In the past, the great Ming dynasty had a cannon called the copper fire cannon. It was like a large gun barrel, and it was very difficult to move it. Moreover, not only was its power not great, but its shooting range was also very limited. It would only be effective if it was shot at a fixed target in advance. As for using it in battle, it was almost worthless. In view of the various shortcomings in the past, Zhu Qiyu, the emperor of the northern Ming dynasty, had put in a lot of effort this time. First, he gathered many blacksmiths. Among them, there was no lack of blacksmiths who were experienced in forging firearms. Everyone gathered together to brainstorm and improve the cannon according to the mercenaries' cannon. This resulted in the current improved version, which could also be called the enhanced version of the advanced cannon. When the red cloth was lifted by Yang Guang, the biggest change to Yang Qindong was that the cannon had 2 more wheels. Although it still looked very heavy, at least it could be moved, increasing its flexibility to a certain extent. Duke of Loyalty, this cannon is called the Red Coat Cannon by Emperor Daizong. Its bowl diameter is 230 millimeters. Its barrel diameter is 80 millimeters. Its length is 150 centimeters, and it weighs about 50 kilograms. Compared to the previous copper fire cannon, which had a bowl diameter of 110 millimeters, a barrel diameter of 58 millimeters, a length of 36, 5 centimeters, and a weight of 75 kilograms, it is more powerful, and its shooting range is more than twice as long. After listening to Yang Guang's introduction, Yang Qindong looked at the cannons. There was an opening at the front of the barrel that was larger than the barrel. The back of the barrel was a powder chamber, and there was an ignition hole for the fuse. Yang Qindong nodded. It looks much more impressive than the previous cannons. However, I wonder how far it can shoot and how lethal it is. Duke of Loyalty, we have tested this several times. The conclusion is that once the cannon is fired, its attack range can reach up to 450 meters, and its killing range can reach up to 3 meters. Attack range is still a shortcoming. Yang Qindong shook his head when he heard that the cannon could only hit less than 300 meters away. If someone else had said this, Yang Qindong would have retorted, saying that the other party was sour grapes. However, when the same words came out of Yang Qindong's mouth, it was completely different. Yang Guang had once followed Yang Qindong and was fortunate enough to see the mercenaries' cannon. He understood what Yang Qindong meant. That's right, Duke of Loyalty. However, to be able to hit a target at a distance of 450 meters is already very difficult. To be honest, Ming doesn't have much money. Even the 500 cannons used up their entire treasury. About an hour later, Yang Qindong and Yang San followed Yang Guang out of the artillery battalion with their disguises as bodyguards. This trip had given Yang Qindong a deeper understanding of the Ming army's capabilities. To be honest, he was still somewhat shocked. It was also because of his appearance that the development of Ming's cannons had improved significantly. According to Yang Guang, other than the fact that the attack range wasn't satisfactory. The effectiveness of the cannons were many times better than before. If these cannons were used on the battlefield, the mercenaries would suffer greatly if they didn't know about it beforehand. After bidding farewell to Yang Guang, the two of them made their way to the Su clan in the capital. Since they were already out, Yang Qindong naturally had to do what he had to do. The carriage representing him should have already picked up the two madams and left the immortal abode for the Yang clan manor. That was tantamount to attracting everyone's attention. At this time, Yang Qindong's actions would remain a secret. "Young master, how about I bring a few more people with me? There's no need to alarm others. Our Bureau of Security has a team in Ming. Although they aren't as strong as the guards, they're still quite skilled." When Yang San learned that Yang Qindong was going to visit Minister of Justice Su Yozhin's residence, and that it was a secret visit, he couldn't help but worry for his safety. "It's fine." Yang Qindong smiled and refused his kind intentions. Since they were going in secret, the fewer people who knew about it, the better. As for whether or not there would be any danger with just the two of them in the Su clan manor, haha, even if Su Yozhin was given a few more guts, he still wouldn't have the guts. In the Su clan manor, it was already late at night, but as the master of the manor, Su Yozhin had no intention of going to sleep. Even though his new concubine had already sent people to urge him several times, he still remained indifferent. Through his own channels, Su Yozhin had already learned about what had happened in the immortal abode today. This was the main reason why he couldn't sleep peacefully. Speaking of which, Su Yozhin could be considered one of the first officials to pledge allegiance to Yang Qindong, and he'd also benefited the most. He'd been promoted from a mere 6th-rank official to the Minister of Justice, a 2nd-rank official. After Dai Zong removed the cabinet, the position of Minister of Justice was equivalent to that of a cabinet elder, and he was one of the highest-ranking officials. Logically speaking, after reaching his current position, there shouldn't be anything to be dissatisfied with. However, in reality, Su Yozhin's heart had always been in his throat. It had been a long time since he'd had a good night's sleep. The reason for all this was because Yang Qindong was too powerful. It had to be said that Su Yozhin's thirst for power and wealth was extremely great. In fact, he'd even resorted to some shady and unscrupulous methods to get to the top. However, all of this was for the sake of a better life. He'd never even considered rebelling. For example, when he'd first chosen to follow Yang Qindong, it was because he saw how generous this young master was and wanted to take advantage of him. He'd never imagined that not only was Yang Qindong generous, but his methods of handling matters, especially when it came to war, were so formidable that he'd become a threat to the existence of the great Ming dynasty. Su Yozhin had never thought that things would turn out this way. He just wanted to lean on a big tree to enjoy the shade. After all, if he wanted to be an official in the imperial court, he must learn to unite with others and stand in a group to attack another group. In layman's terms, it was a struggle between parties for authority. However, the big tree he was relying on was too powerful. It directly skipped this step and went straight to a new force. If it wasn't restrained, it wasn't impossible for it to become a new country one day. As a result, it was too dangerous for Su Yozhin to stand under this big tree. If he didn't want to be an official, he could resign and return to his hometown. However, if he relied on other forces and was found out, he'd definitely lose his head. Not only him, but even his family wouldn't be able to get any benefits. At that time, it was entirely possible for his entire family to be executed. With such a serious consequence pressing down on his head, he was afraid that no one would be able to sleep peacefully. Fortunately, Yang Qindong didn't appear in front of him often. As the saying goes, the mountain is high and the emperor is far away. What the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't worry. When he didn't think about things, his mood would be better. However, now that Yang Qindong had returned to the capital of Ming, wouldn't their relationship be discovered at any time? For the sake of the overall situation, the Dai Zong Emperor wouldn't do anything to Yang Qindong, but that didn't mean that he couldn't deal with him. Duke of Loyalty, Duke of Loyalty, how could you be so bold? You even killed the embroidered uniform guards and caused such a big commotion. Aren't you forcing the Dai Zong Emperor to fall out with you? Imperial power can't be blasphemed. If that's the case, both sides will really fight. What should we do? Su Yozhin muttered to himself with an ashen expression. He didn't know the true strength of the mercenaries. Only habit told him that the great Ming dynasty was the great Ming dynasty. Not everyone could succeed in a rebellion. Over the years, hadn't countless facts already proven this point? He didn't know that his current performance was no different from that of a lackey. Yang Qindong acted as if he had returned to his own home. He found a chair near the stove and sat down. Then he saw Su Yozhin trotting over. Perhaps it was because his living conditions had improved. Compared to the last time they met, he had gained at least 5 kilograms. He was not thin to begin with, but now he looked even more plump. Minister Su, look at your figure. You eat and drink well. Ha ha. It's all thanks to Duke of Loyalty and Courage. In this short period of time, Su Yozhin had stabilized her mind. When she spoke, she was much more energetic. Good, it's good that you know. Yang Qindong nodded and then smiled as if he was joking. I have been worried that Minister Su would be worried because you are too close to me in private. Now, it seems that there is no need to enlighten you. It seemed to be a joke, but Su Yozhin was not stupid enough to take it as a joke. His thoughts were seen through. An awkward expression flashed across his face. Then he flattered, Duke of Loyalty and Courage, you are really extraordinary. I heard that you killed the brocade guards. It was really good, really good. Jean Buchuan actually dared to have thoughts of harming the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. That Tong Lai actually dared to make a move against Hu Zhen. There was more than one smart person. Obviously, Su Yozhin also saw that Yang Qindong killed people today, not only to establish his prestige, but also to settle old and new debts. Just based on this point, this person was worthy of being a minister. He really had some skills. Yang Qindong naturally did not have the intention to hide it from the other party. In fact, after knowing that Hu Kuin was under Jean Buchuan's orders, the Security Bureau told Su Yozhin the news and asked him to cooperate to get some information about Jean Buchuan. He could be considered an insider. It was not surprising that he could say such words. Yang Qindong also nodded. Come, have a seat. Tell me about your views on the current situation. Yang Qindong was never arrogant and did not think that the decisions he made were necessarily correct. What he needed to do was to listen to more people's opinions and then choose the most suitable path for himself. This time, other than coming to Su Yozhin to remind him, he also wanted to listen to the views of this bystander on the current situation and use it as a reference. The Security Bureau had already reported that Su Yozhin's recent performance was not very good. There were many things that he did not take the initiative to report to them, giving them the feeling of being thousands of miles away from them. When Yang Qindong reported the matter to him, Yang Qindong had already guessed Su Yozhin's thoughts. After all, scholars were scholars, and their courage was still a bit too small. They dared to do things like fighting for power and profit, but when it involved rebellion and the lives of their entire family, they still retreated in the end. It was just that after receiving so many benefits and taking so much money from him, he wanted to withdraw now. How could there be such a cheap thing in the world? He was mainly here to remind the other party that there were some things that could not be turned back, such as political choices. Before getting down to business, Yang Qindong did not mind listening to his views on the current situation, so he sat down with a calm and composed look. Su Yozhin was a smart person, even very smart. Yang Qindong suddenly came to visit at night, and he did not even greet him. Why was that? Wasn't it a sign that he did not believe him? Thinking that the other party was able to quietly appear here. Presumably, the servants in the residence must not have noticed. While he cursed them in his heart, he also became extremely careful. This was a person who could even kill the embroidered uniform guards if he wanted to, and he did it openly. If he angered the other party, it would not be too much trouble for him to kill him. While he was frightened, Su Yojin knew that he had to perform better to obtain Yang Qindong's attention and trust. At that moment, he was silent for a while. Then he began to speak quietly. The current emperor is a very thoughtful and ambitious person. As a descendant of the Zhou family, he wants to repeat the glory of his father's generation. Unifying the great Ming dynasty is one of the things that he wants to do, and then he wants to eliminate the external enemies and sweep the world. In order to achieve this goal, the Ming army imitated the mercenaries and greatly improved their weapons and equipment. Now, advanced firearms and even advanced cannons have been created. The 500,000 recruits have been trained, and the 500,000 newly recruited soldiers are also in the midst of training. If this continues, it will not be long before the conditions for war are met. At that time, not only the southern Ming dynasty and Walla, but even the mercenaries will be enemies in their eyes. As he spoke, he paid attention to the changes in Yang Qindong's expression. This was the reason why Su Yojin wanted to retreat and get off the boat. Didn't the mercenaries rely on their advanced firearms to win against the Walla? Now that the Ming army has a large number of firearms and they have more people than the mercenaries, their advantage is obvious. If the two sides were to meet, who would win and who would lose would be a big question mark. If that was the case, where would Su Yojin go? Yang Qindong naturally understood the situation. He was originally a little worried, but after going to the artillery battalion, his worries completely disappeared. Even if the cannons could only hit a distance of 500 meters, what did he have to fear even if they were stronger? Not to mention other things, with his large warehouse, he could completely destroy the artillery battalion in an instant. However, he would not say these words to Su Yojin. Although this person had joined him long ago, it was only because of the situation. In his heart, this person was still biased towards the Ming dynasty. In his eyes, only the Zhou family was orthodox. Even if he was only a prince with the surname Zhou, perhaps he would still follow him. On the contrary, in the eyes of others, a power with a different surname would not have a good ending sooner or later. Su Yojin was not the only one who thought this way. In fact, there were many people who thought this way. They all saw the Zhou family's descendants as orthodox. This was also another reason why Yang Qindong did not choose to start with the Ming dynasty. He did not want to spend a lot of effort to manage them after occupying a piece of land, or even prevent them from rebelling. On the contrary, small countries like Jiaoji and Lancang did not have a deep foundation. If they fell, then so be it. They would be able to be used very quickly. Speaking of which, Su Yojin's words also indirectly expressed his attitude. That was, the Ming army had become stronger. This meant that sooner or later, the mercenaries would have to fight with them. Moreover, many people did not think highly of the mercenaries. This was the current situation in Ming. Su Yojin was still sitting there talking. He talked about the changes in the army, the changes in the imperial court, and especially the changes in the Ministry of War. Recently, the generals had been making adjustments. It was unknown how many young men who had no background but were capable were promoted to the front lines. All of this proved that Zhu Qiyu valued the military very much and that he was determined to fight, as expected of someone who had been a cabinet minister in the future, and as expected of one of the most powerful ministers in history. Su Yojin's analysis of the situation was clear and logical. The information that came out of his mouth was much richer and more vivid than the information obtained from the Security Bureau. Chapter 807. Su Yojin spoke for quite a while. After drinking 2 cups of tea, she ended her speech with one sentence. I even have a suspicion that the Southern Ming and Northern Ming might even cooperate for the sake of the Zhou clan's empire. If they really do come to an agreement and work together to deal with foreign powers, then no power in the world would be a match for them. When he said this, Su Yojin's attitude was firm, as if what he said was the truth. However, he didn't know that the world he was talking about and the world Yang Qindong was talking about were worlds apart. Putting everything else aside, what he saw was only the great Ming Empire. It also included the surrounding small countries, Korea, Japan, Mongolia, and other places. He couldn't imagine how big the world was outside of Asia, how many countries there were, and how strong or weak they were. But Yang Qindong knew, and his goal was grand. He didn't just want to conquer the great Ming dynasty, nor did he want to repeat the glory of the Mongols. He also wanted to achieve an even higher goal, and that was to unify the whole world and let all the Han people stand at the peak of the world. If he had to describe it in one sentence, it would be that as long as he could see the world, it would become the territory of the Han people, and it would be under the rule of the Han people. This was a great dream that no one in the past or in the future would be able to achieve. Even if Yang Qindong came from the future and had advanced technology, it would still be very difficult to achieve this goal. After all, this didn't only involve military affairs, but also religion, faith, culture, geography, and so on. However, Yang Qindong still did it without hesitation. With his current strength, he could be a rich man or even a carefree prince. He could occupy his own land, establish his own country, and unify his own territory, ensuring that he could live a good life. However, he didn't make such a choice. He thought about how the world treated the Han people in the future, and how the Han people couldn't obtain true fairness in many things. Since he came here, he had to think of a way to change everything. Perhaps thousands of years later, he wouldn't be here anymore, and his descendants wouldn't be able to live up to expectations. In the end, the world would change again. However, he wouldn't refuse to do what he should do, and he wouldn't stop doing it because of the law of development. There were always people who had to do things. If the Han people wanted to achieve these goals, who knew how many people they would have to kill in the end, and how many countries would have to be destroyed. But so what? Buddha said, if I don't go to hell, who will go to hell? If there was any punishment from the heavens, then it would be directed at him. As long as the Han people could live a better life and have a higher status, it would be worth it for him to sacrifice himself to help all the Han people. After Su Yojin finished speaking, he talked about how powerful Bai Ming's military was now. Subconsciously, he was also advising Yang Qindong to stop. He even revealed his own thoughts in his words. If Yang Qindong was willing to stop his expansion and hand over all the mercenaries to the court, he would be willing to protect him and let him live a carefree life as a prince with a different surname. Chuckling, Yang Qindong looked at Su Yojin with a cold gaze. As the saying goes, a person in Jianghu is like a boat going against the current. If you don't advance, you will fall back. The situation was already like this. So how could he possibly retreat? Even if he handed over his military power and obtained the identity of a prince, who could guarantee that once the great Ming dynasty gained the upper hand, there wouldn't be a day when they would kill the donkey after it had outlived its usefulness? Would there be a day when they would casually find a reason to kill him? Yang Qindong didn't like the idea of putting his life in the hands of others. As the saying goes, one's life is up to oneself and not the heavens. Since he already had this ability, why should he put his hopes on others? Chuckling, Yang Qindong looked coldly at Su Yojin. Minister Su, I already know what you said. I also appreciate your good intentions, but you are not me, so you can't make decisions for me. Similarly, I am not you, so I can't make decisions for you. But I can still give you a suggestion. Oh, loyal Duke, please say it clearly. Su Yojin looked like he was all ears. Actually, it's not much of a suggestion. It's just the truth. After I leave, you can go into the palace to see Daizong. Tell him everything about your relationship with him, including how much you've received and what you've done for him. You can tell him everything. You can even tell him that Bai Ming won't allow other forces to exist. Loyal Duke also won't allow other forces, including Bai Ming, to exist. The best way to solve this problem is to take advantage of the fact that my army is outside and people are in Yangjia village to immediately attack me. This is the best way to solve this problem once and for all. There was a smile on his face, but every time he said a sentence, Su Yojin's body couldn't help but tremble. How was this a suggestion? It was clearly a threat. Su Yojin had done a lot of research on Daizong. If you really had a problem with government affairs, he could forgive you. If you were just greedy and had a good performance, he would only remind you. He wouldn't really do anything to you. After all, the great Ming dynasty didn't kill imperial censors and didn't punish scholars. The ancestral law still had some effect. However, if you dared to live off one person and betray another, then it was absolutely intolerable. The previous Minister of Justice, Yu Shuriyue, was someone that Daizong had personally favored and promoted. In terms of closeness, he was much stronger than him. But in the end, what happened? Was it because Yu Shuriyue was found to have private contact with Southern Mingzong and was immediately executed? Yu Shuriyue said that Kill had been killed, so why should Su Yojin be fine? Did he really think that everything would be fine if he took the initiative to admit his mistake? Too naive. Su Yojin, who was already covered in cold sweat, was no longer as confident as when he analyzed the situation of the world. He continuously wiped the sweat with his sleeve and looked at Yang Qindong. He forced a smile and said, "Loyal Duke, I'm joking." "Humph, this is indeed a joke. I also hope that you won't give me the chance. Otherwise, I don't know if I'll be fine, but you will be the first to die. If that day comes, even if Daizong wants a good reputation and let your family go, I won't let them go. Don't blame me for being ruthless. Being merciful to one's opponent is being cruel to oneself. I will definitely not do such a stupid thing, like letting a tiger return to the mountain. That's all I have to say. You should think carefully about what to do in the future and what to do." After saying this, Yang Qindong stood up. He didn't look at Su Yojin and didn't listen to any of his explanations. He turned around and walked out of the room. At this moment, he needed to give Su Yojin time to think carefully. In a hurry, even if the other party made a choice, it might not be sincere. Yang Qindong had already left. Su Yojin felt his body go soft and leaned against a chair and collapsed into a ball. No matter how regretful he was now, and no matter how much he didn't think highly of Yang Qindong, he had no choice now. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that he had already boarded Yang Qindong's ship. Now, even if he wanted to get off, he had to. He seemed to have no other choice. It had been 7 or 8 days since Yang Qindong returned to the capital of Baiming. Seeing that the new year was coming in 3 days, the atmosphere of the entire Yang family manor became lively. Ever since he entered the capital on the 2nd day, Yang Qindong had been holed up in the manor and hadn't gone out. Firstly, he didn't want to add any pressure to the guards around him. Secondly, he didn't want to excessively provoke the Baiming court. Jining had already sent someone to pass on the message. Daizong had agreed to most of the requests that they had discussed, but there were some specific details that still needed to be discussed. From today onwards, Jining would personally come to the Yang family manor to talk and make the final decision on some matters. Beta Persei, I'll leave this matter to you. In the morning, Yang Qindong practiced martial arts and ran 5 kilometers with the guards. When he returned to the courtyard, he said this to Beta Persei. "Me?" Beta Persei pointed at himself in disbelief. "Yes, it's you. I think it's good that you're dealing with Jining. Of course, I'll arrange 3 assistants for you. Yang San, Wang Si, and Sherbei will follow you. You just need to be in the formation and watch the 3 of them perform. When the discussion is over, you'll be in charge of the final decision." Yang Qindong said this very solemnly. He didn't seem to be joking at all. Yang Qindong didn't have a good impression of eunuchs. He was even more repulsed by this kind of debating with them. If it weren't for the fact that the time was far from ripe, he probably wouldn't have even bothered to talk and would have directly mobilized his troops to fight. Since he couldn't fight, he would leave the negotiation to his subordinates. There was also an advantage to leaving it to Beta Persei. If something fell through, he could step in at the end to remedy the situation. After Yang Qindong said this, Beta Persei knew that the matter had been decided and couldn't be changed. He nodded and said, "All right, Beta Persei will obey the young master's orders." "Haha, very good." He reached out and patted Beta Persei's shoulder. "All right, you go and discuss with Yang San and the others. I'll go to the academy to take a look at the young master." Yang Qindong didn't bring any guards. This was a sign of his confidence in the safety of the Yang clan. He strode to the outside of the academy. Along the way, many people would salute him from afar when they saw him, expressing the most sincere respect in their hearts. Chapter 808. In the past few days, Yang Qindong came to the academy most often, except for the bed of the two madams in the inner courtyard of the manor. In line with the political policy of putting people first and needing talents for development, he even gave a few lectures to the students of the academy. The contents of the lectures were not from the textbooks, but they were very practical and involved some profound issues such as local management and human rights, which attracted the reflection and discussion of the students of the academy. According to the second Dean Wang Si, the discussion was very enthusiastic and the results were obviously good. The new year was coming soon, and the negotiations were about to begin. Everything was developing in an orderly manner as expected. Yang Qindong was in a good mood, humming some tunes of the later generations as he came to the gate of the academy. Coincidentally, he bumped into Junko, who was dressed in Han Chinese clothing, but it still set off her slim figure. Junko was at the age of 18 or 19, which was the most beautiful time of her life. Suddenly, she saw Yang Qindong here, and the other party was alone. This scene and this sudden encounter made her stunned in place, and then quickly lowered her head. Yang Qindong was also a little surprised by this unexpected encounter. But since they met, it was not good to not say anything. So Yang Qindong tried to pretend to be normal and said, "It's Junko, how are you? How are your studies here? You should be used to life here." 2 years ago, the two of them were still in contact with each other. At that time, the relationship between the two of them was much warmer than it was now. There was even a time when the two of them almost had a spark of love. But with the passage of time, her feelings for Yang Qindong slowly decreased. At this moment, Junko didn't know how to face Yang Qindong. She didn't even know what to say to him. Seeing Junko standing there for a long time without speaking, Yang Qindong's expression was slightly embarrassed. And then he said, "Oh, you still have things to do. Then you can do it." After saying this, Yang Qindong was about to walk past Junko. But just as he took a step, Junko, who was lowering her head, suddenly said, "What? You don't want to see me? You're not even willing to spend some time alone with me?" Yang Qindong looked aggrieved. "I was talking to you, and I even acted like I cared about you, but you didn't answer me at all." Of course, such words could only be suppressed in his heart. Yang Qindong wasn't that stupid to reason with a woman. He chuckled, looking very calm. How could that be? After all, we're old friends. "Oh, right, do you have any plans for the future?" "After the new year, I will take the people in the manor and leave for the grasslands. If you are willing, you can come with me." "Of course, if you miss your royal father, I will arrange for someone to send you to your own country after we reach the grasslands." How should he treat Junko? This was a problem that the two ladies often talked about with him these days. Junko was young and beautiful. She grew up in the palace. She had a noble and elegant temperament, the kind that men couldn't help but like. Yang Qindong was a man, a very normal man and a healthy man. If he said that he didn't have any thoughts about her, he wouldn't believe it. But when he thought that one of his goals in the future was to destroy the Japanese army and rebuild it, he had to suppress his thoughts about Junko. Not only did he want to marry her, but he also wanted to destroy her country, especially the country that belonged to her royal father. No matter how he looked at it, it was so unreasonable. Yang Qindong was a person who cared about his face. He couldn't do such a thing. After thinking about it, Yang Qindong made the decision to let go of Junko. Of course, this decision was made by himself. If Junko didn't want to leave him and insisted on following him, then he would stop while he was ahead. The choice he was making was a test for him. Yang Qindong actually said that he would let her go. This was what Junko had been thinking, but she didn't know why. Now, after hearing this sentence, she was not happy at all. There was a faint sense of loss in her heart. "That, I will give you an answer after thinking about it, okay? Anyway, no matter what, I will go to the grassland with you, right?" Junko didn't make a decision right away. Instead, she decided to use this time to think about it. She had to admit that Yang Qindong's shadow had long been in her heart. If she was just an ordinary Japanese woman, she was afraid that she would have already found a way to throw herself into the arms of this man who gave her the feeling that he was omnipotent and had the most solid arm. But she was not. She was the daughter of the Emperor of Japan. She was destined to dedicate her life to the country and her family. This mission was instilled in her heart since she was a child. It was not something that could be changed in 2 years. Yang Qindong didn't expect her to answer right away. This was something that would decide her life, so he nodded painfully. "Okay, after you reach the grassland, you can come to me after you have made your decision. No matter what decision you make, I will understand and support it." "Thank you," Junko said gratefully when she heard Yang Qindong understand her so well. "You're welcome." Yang Qindong, who answered with a smile, suddenly remembered that the negotiation with Jining was still lacking a recorder. He remembered that Junko's Chinese was not only good, but her handwriting was also very beautiful. So he had another idea. "By the way, the negotiation between the Beiming Imperial Court and us will begin soon. If you are interested, you can be a recorder." "Recorder?" Junko raised her head and looked at Yang Qindong with those big eyes that seemed to be able to speak. "Yes, a recorder. You will record what both sides have said, as well as the final result of the negotiation. It is actually a bit difficult. If you are not willing to go, I will arrange for someone else to do it." Yang Qindong didn't know what Junko meant, so he didn't say anything. "No, I am willing to go." To Yang Qindong's surprise, Junko actually nodded excitedly. As the emperor's daughter, she seemed to be very interested in politics since she was young. Now that she was lucky enough to witness the negotiation between Beiming and the mercenaries, she naturally wouldn't reject such a good thing. "Okay, then you should prepare well." Yang Qindong nodded. He also had his own plans in mind. He wanted Junko to understand more about the situation on his side. Perhaps after a comparison, she would discover how weak the Japanese Empire was and directly throw herself into his arms. After this meeting, Jining quickly brought a group of people to the Yang village. A large house was specially arranged in the outer courtyard. The fire inside was very strong, and it became the place for both sides to negotiate. Beta Persei appeared as the main negotiator. Along with him were the chief of security, Yang San, the second dean of the Yang Academy, Wang Si, Yang Qindong's personally appointed advisor, Sheeb, and the recorder, Princess Junko. Jining didn't show any displeasure towards Yang Qindong not personally participating in this negotiation. On the contrary, he was somewhat happy. After all, Yang Qindong gave him too much pressure. Anyone who faced such a strong opponent would bear a heavy psychological pressure. Under such a mentality, it was very difficult to negotiate a favorable outcome. Yang Heir, on the other hand, was different. He would not give himself any pressure. This way, when they were talking, he would be able to express his own demands better and even raise some excessive conditions. Both sides sat together with their own thoughts and began to negotiate some related matters. 15 li away, in the capital of Beiming, in an extremely ordinary courtyard, several people were gathered to discuss a heaven-shaking matter. It wasn't an exaggeration to call it a major matter, because the ultimate goal of this matter was to kill the Duke of Loyalty, Yang Qindong. When Yang Qindong arrived in the capital of Beiming, the ones who were nervous were naturally the Beiming faction. First, they had to make a choice between attacking or not attacking, and once they chose to cooperate, no one would harbor any evil intentions toward the Duke of Loyalty. But just because Beiming didn't have such thoughts didn't mean that others didn't. like the Southern Ming Empire. The people in this room were assassins sent by the Southern Ming Empire. They had made the decision to assassinate Yang Qindong with the dual goal of striking down the mercenaries and Bai Ming. And once their goal was achieved, it was easy to imagine what kind of chaos it would cause. At that time, both sides would fight to the death, and no matter who won or lost, the Southern Ming Empire would be able to reap the benefits. When the Southern Ming Emperor Zhu Qijin made this decision, he gave the task to his most trusted aide, Chao Jixiang. Then his nephew, Chao Xian, rushed all the way from Nanjing to Beijing and began to make various preparations for the assassination. In the room, the one sitting at the head was Chao Xian. He had arrived in the capital of Bai Ming last night, and he was naturally very familiar with this place where he had stayed for decades. He quickly contacted the Southern Ming Empire's embroidered uniform guards, and today's meeting was held. In order to prevent the news from being leaked, these embroidered uniform guards who took orders from the Southern Ming Empire didn't know what their mission was. They only knew that they were going to kill someone. Chao Xian's gaze was gloomy and cold. He first looked around at his subordinates before saying, "His Majesty Ingzong values this mission greatly. Once it's completed, I can guarantee that all of you will enjoy glory, splendor, and wealth in the future. You only need to complete this task, and you can return to the Southern Ming Empire as meritorious subjects. And for the sake of Dawning's goal, I need all of you to mobilize your most elite forces and wait for my orders. Do you understand?" Understood. Even though they didn't know who they were going to kill, they didn't need to think too much about the huge benefits. At this moment, they were blinded by the benefits of succeeding and had lost their rationality. Chapter 809. Chao Xian first arranged for his subordinates to gather elites, and then he disguised himself and made a trip to the Dong residence in the city. Although it was called a residence, it was just a slightly larger courtyard. The owner, Dong Bao, was the general of Bai Ming's Yongding Gate, but he was only a trifling 6th-rank military official. And this was only because Dai Zong had recently increased the treatment of generals. Otherwise, with his salary alone, it would have taken him countless years to buy a courtyard like this in the capital, where every inch of land was worth its weight in gold. The general of the Yongding Gate was just one of Dong Bao's official identities. He had another identity, a hidden chess piece that Dai Zong had left in Bai Ming's capital. It was only because of his low rank and the fact that there were no missions for him to do that he was able to hide himself very well. But even if he was a hidden chess piece, it would be impossible for him to live a peaceful life. With Chao Xian's arrival, his life was destined to undergo a major change. The 29th day of the 12th lunar month, the 3rd day of negotiations. Overall, the progress was pretty good. Perhaps both sides wanted to negotiate, but they were both wary of the other. Thus, many major issues had already been settled, but there were still some minor issues that required both sides to make some concessions. These matters were left to Beta Persei and the others. Yang Qindong only needed to listen to the reports after the negotiations and look at Junko's records. As a result, he was quite content, and he was able to spend more time with his 2 wives every day. However, life seemed to be filled with all kinds of accidents. Whenever a problem appeared, another problem would involuntarily pop up. It had only been a few days when the Yang Manor's housekeeper, Yang Ning, appeared outside the inner courtyard, saying that he wanted to see the 6th young master. Yang Ning was the eldest son of the Yang clan's steward, Yang Hai. Yang Hai had followed Yang Rong for many years, so there was no need to doubt his loyalty. Yang Ning had inherited his father's character, and after becoming the steward of the Yang clan manor, he had performed well and was now in charge of the immortal abode. Yang Qindong was somewhat taken aback by this sudden request, but in the end he still went to see him. Only then did he learn that the immortal abode had suffered from mass food poisoning. There were 4 tables full of 20 customers who had eaten something bad, and they refused to leave the immortal abode. Today was the 29th day of the new year. The closer it was to the end of the year, the better the business of the hotel became. Those who had money in their pockets would call their friends. When they gathered together, it was inevitable that they would eat and drink. The immortal abode, which had the best taste, the best environment, and the best way to show off one's status, became the place where everyone fought to be the first to gather. Compared to normal times, business in the immortal abode was exceptionally good before and after the new year. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that it was hard to find a place. Even the best locations had to be reserved a few days in advance. But in such a lively time, the sudden appearance of poisoning, one could imagine how big of a commotion it would cause. However, a mere poisoning incident wasn't enough for Yang Ning to rush back to the Yang family manor to see him. In such a large restaurant, once such a special incident occurred, they must have already taken measures to deal with it. Thus, Yang Qindong looked at the nervous Yang Ning and asked, "Speak. Is there some important figure among the poisoned customers?" As soon as Yang Qindong said this, Yang Ning's eyes revealed a very surprised expression. Sixth young master is indeed formidable. Indeed, one of the 20 poisoned customers is the current imperial censor of the right, Dong Chunhua. Because such a person is involved, we do not dare to act rashly. How could we possibly invite the sixth young master over? Yang Qindong chuckled, an expression that said, "As expected." This Dong Chunhua could be considered an old acquaintance. He had once wanted to show off in front of Wang Chong and trample on Wang Chong's face, but in the end he had naturally suffered a loss. Among the current second-rank officials, Yang Qindong and Yu Shiyue naturally didn't get along, so Yang Qindong had gotten rid of him. The remaining second-rank official was Dong Chunhua, who had been the left deputy imperial censor at that time. Wang Chong didn't expect to meet them again, and the other party had even been promoted from deputy to official. But this time, it was obvious that the other party's luck wasn't good, and Wang Chong was in the wrong. I understand. Since that's the case, this young master will personally make a trip. Since it involved a second-rank official, even if it was for the sake of face, it wouldn't be easy for an ordinary person to handle it. If Yang Qindong wasn't in the capital, it would be fine. But since he was, if he didn't make an appearance, it would be inevitable for others to say that he was arrogant. It was best not to leave such a domineering impression. Yang Ning was naturally overjoyed that the sixth young master was going to personally make a move. He immediately went to arrange a carriage. Considering that Beta Persei was still negotiating with Jining, Yang Qindong didn't want to disturb him. Instead, he called for Yang Si and 50 members of the First Guard Squad to leave the Yang clan manor. They were still negotiating with Bai Ming, and Yang Qindong didn't think that anyone would try to target him at this time. Besides, even if it was an ordinary threat, the First Guard Squad should be able to deal with it. In the immortal abode, the initial excitement had already died down. The incident had happened too suddenly. At the start, the 4 tables of customers were all pale and powerless, truly frightening the other customers. But when the immortal abode's resident physician came out and examined the dishes, it was determined that they had been poisoned with laxatives, not the quality of the food. This sort of thing really had happened in the past. Some people in the same industry saw that the immortal abode's business was doing so well, so they found people to poison the food in an attempt to ruin its reputation. It could be said that only people in the same industry had undisguised hatred. When this incident first happened, it caused quite a bit of chaos. But the immortal abode immediately took decisive measures. Not only did they find the best physicians to treat their customers, they also paid a considerable sum of money. When the customers didn't pursue the matter, the others naturally couldn't say anything. Not to mention, this sort of thing could happen in other restaurants as well. It wasn't strange anymore. It was just that the 4 tables of customers had some problems, and the immortal abode's steward had immediately stepped out to show his sincerity. Today, all of the customers had a 20% discount on their meals. This quickly calmed everyone down, and everything returned to normal. Only the 4 tables of customers still had unsightly expressions because of their stomachs. Normally, the steward would have already apologized and paid 200 taels of silver to each person, and the matter should have been resolved. Unfortunately, the imperial censor of the rite, Dong Chanhua, was among the 20 people. He didn't accept the money, nor did he have any intention of leaving. As such, the others could only sit there and accompany him. Dong Chuanhua's luck really wasn't too good. The officials below him insisted on treating him to a meal when it was the New Year. He couldn't refuse them, so he came. He never would have thought that something like this would happen. He was a second-rank official, yet he had to fight over a toilet with a commoner because of his stomachs. If word got out, it was truly embarrassing. After taking the anti-diarrheal medicine prescribed by the physician, Dong Chuanhua's condition improved a bit, and he began to think of a plan. He could be considered one of Dai Zong's trusted aides, and he'd been looking for faults with the Duke of Loyalty and Courage this entire time. Since this kind of thing had happened to him, if he didn't take advantage of it, wouldn't he be letting down all the suffering he'd suffered just now? As such, he had no intention of leaving. He sat there, waiting for Yang Qindong to appear. Then he'd have a good talk with him. Even if he could only use this opportunity to make the other party admit defeat, that would still be a very impressive thing to do. Dong Chanhua didn't have to wait for too long. An extremely luxurious carriage arrived at the entrance of the immortal abode. Then, several dozen black-clad guards appeared on both sides. Just from this lineup, everyone knew that the Duke of Loyalty and Courage had arrived. It had to be said that Yang Qindong was very famous in Bai Ming's capital. He was different from the other dukes, marquises, and counts. These people only had status, but they didn't have any real power. When outside, it was best to keep a low profile as much as possible. Otherwise, the imperial censors weren't just for show. They'd report you at any time. Compared to them, Yang Qindong's lineup was much larger. No matter where he went, he would instantly become the center of attention. In this regard, the imperial censors couldn't do anything about it. There was nothing they could do about it. He was the leader of an army. Who knew how many people he'd killed on the battlefield? Who knew how many people he'd offended because of this? It was only natural that he had strict security measures. Of course, the most important reason was that the soldiers he was leading weren't from the Great Ming. Moreover, Yang Qindong himself had never received any salary from Bai Ming. Even if these imperial censors wanted to report him, they wouldn't be able to do anything about it. When they saw that the Duke of Loyalty and Courage had arrived, a few of the diners looked toward the entrance with eager eyes. In truth, when the incident happened, there were some people who weren't afraid of the consequences and waited here. In fact, even after they finished eating, they had no choice but to call a few more people over. They wanted to see how the Duke of Loyalty and Courage would deal with Sir Dong. The carriage stopped, and a green-robed Yang Qindong stepped out. He was still dressed the same as before. If there was any change, it would be that he looked more mature. After getting out of the carriage, Yang Nang led him to a table on the left side of the first floor. In ancient times, the left side was the most respected. In the immortal abode, apart from the second and third floors, the left side of the first floor was the best location. Yang Qindong attracted everyone's attention as soon as he appeared. They wanted to see if the Duke of Loyalty and Courage would lower his head and admit his mistakes. Even if it was just a bow to Dong Chanhua, it would be a victory that he could be proud of for a long time. Dong Chanhua, who was originally sitting there calmly, didn't know why, but when he heard footsteps outside and saw the diners suddenly stop and look outside, he began to feel inexplicably nervous. When Yang Qindong's figure completely appeared in front of him, he suddenly stood up. If it weren't for the fact that his face was still pale and bloodless, it would be hard to believe that he had already lost half his life from vomiting and diarrhea. Chapter 810. All of this was because Yang Qindong's reputation was too great. The last time they'd met, he hadn't been able to gain the slightest bit of advantage, which had left a shadow in his heart. As soon as he saw Yang Qindong, he instinctively stood up. As soon as he stood up, he happened to meet Yang Qindong's gaze. Then, under the collective gazes of everyone present, an unexpected scene occurred. Yang Qindong, who'd just entered the main hall, couldn't stop himself from bursting into laughter. "Ha ha ha ha. It seems like you've suffered quite a bit. My apologies, I couldn't control myself. I was just expressing my feelings, that's all." Not only did Yang Qindong not have the slightest intention of apologizing, he even had a mocking look on his face. Instantly, the other diners all fell silent. Then, when they came back to their senses, they also began to laugh loudly. This laughter caused Dong Chuanhua's face to turn red. He'd been waiting for the other party to teach him a lesson. Who would have thought that when the other party came, he'd be the first to stand up in fright? Then he'd be ridiculed instead. If news of this spread, he'd probably become a laughingstock. The originally tense atmosphere was completely dispelled by this laughter. Dong Chuanhua knew that there was no point in keeping a straight face, so he could only face it head-on. With a serious expression, he asked, "Duke Zhongdan, the immortal abode, is your business. Now that a guest has been poisoned by a laxative while eating here, how do you explain this?" Yang Qindong's expression also suddenly became much more serious. He angrily said, "I express my extreme indignation and anger towards the despicable people who use such underhanded means to harm my immortal abode's business. I strongly condemn them. If I discover anyone else doing this in the immortal abode, I will definitely hand them over to the authorities and give them a heavy punishment. As for the guests who have been harmed, our immortal abode will also compensate them appropriately. We will compensate them as much as we can to express our apologies. Sir Dong, I presume that the stewards of the immortal abode have already given each of your guests 200 taels of silver. Don't tell me you didn't receive it?" The words he'd said earlier were all righteous words, but if one thought about it carefully, they were all just diplomatic words. This was also a common tactic used by various countries in the future. Towards the end, it was as if they were trying to make a big issue small, and a small issue into nothing. However, if one person had to pay 200 taels, 20 people would pay 4,000 taels of silver. This wasn't a small amount. Seeing Yang Qindong ask if he had received the silver, Dong Chuanhua wanted to say no, but others had received it. Why didn't he? He couldn't say that he didn't want to take it, let alone that he thought the silver was too little. To pay, of them to say to pay, to pay, to pay. To pay, 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 to pay. Pay! To pay to compensate, to pay to pay to pay, to pay 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 to's to pay. Of the of. To pay a. In other words, the immortal abode's methods were already very fair, leaving the others speechless. When Dong Chuanhua saw that the others didn't say anything after receiving the money, he knew that he was alone. Yang Qindong hadn't shown any signs of weakness. He couldn't beat the other party in words, nor could he beat the other party in a physical fight. Staying here would only increase his troubles. Dong Chuanhua snorted coldly, then walked out of the immortal abode with his hands clasped behind his back. Only the immortal abode would be able to bully their customers. Only they would be able to make a second-rank official speechless and have nothing to say. Seeing Dong Chuanhua leave just like that, without even leaving behind a single vicious word, Yang Qindong felt as if he hadn't heard a thing. "Men, bring that person who paid 200 taels of silver to Sir Dong's residence. No matter what, we can't let him suffer for nothing." Yang Qindong's words seemed to have good intentions, which immediately drew a round of laughter from the other customers. The farce seemed to have ended just like that, but Yang Qindong didn't think that was the case. He called Yang Ning over and asked him what exactly had happened, and whether he'd already investigated the matter. Since he was going to invite the 6th young master over, He naturally had to get to the bottom of the matter. Yang Ning immediately gave him a report of what he'd just learned. Sixth young master, this is how restaurants are. The competition is too fierce. Sometimes, when you can't win in a direct confrontation, you can't help but think of using other methods. This isn't the first time something like this has happened. Fortunately, everyone has some misgivings. Even if they use drugs, they won't use too much force. In any case, it won't harm anyone's life. However, we've still been very careful. When we're cooking and serving the dishes, we have people serving them. I've already asked them, and they're all old hands. They wouldn't do something like taking someone else's money to trample on their own business. It's a bit strange that we don't have any leads at all. The restaurant industry actually had such methods of competition. This was a bit beyond Yang Qindong's expectations. Of course, he didn't know much about the restaurant industry in his past life, so it was only natural that he wouldn't be able to see through it. However, it was a bit strange that he couldn't find the culprit. All right, we have to be more careful in the future. Who cares what other people do? In any case, our immortal abode can't participate in this kind of thing. If we want to attract customers, we have to put more effort into the taste of the dishes, the quality of the service, and the atmosphere. If we use such underhanded methods too often, we'll be struck by lightning. When Yang Qindong saw Yang Ning's anxious and self-reproachful appearance, he reached out and patted him on the shoulder. He had served the Yang clan for generations and had even changed his surname to Yang. Such a loyal person should be encouraged, not discouraged. Yang Qindong nodded emotionally when he sensed Yang Qindong's concern for him. His eyes even reddened as he said, "That's right. We'll remember the sixth young master's words. In the future, we'll continue to improve ourselves. We won't use any underhanded methods." This was just a small matter. If not for the fact that this matter involved a second-rank official, Yang Qindong wouldn't have asked about it. Yang Ning also wouldn't have bothered him over such a small matter. Now that Dong Chanhua had taken the initiative to leave, the matter could be considered to have come to an end. It was just a case of diarrhea. They discovered it in time and given sufficient compensation, so the matter was quickly resolved. Yang Qindong returned to his carriage and headed for the outskirts of the capital. Yongding Gate. This was one of the 12 outskirts of the capital of Ming, and it was also the road that Yang Qindong had to pass through to reach the Yang clan manor. He had already walked this road countless times, especially when Yang Qindong had first arrived at the capital of Ming. Because his elder sister and brother were living in the city, he would make this trip every few days. It was just that after Yang Qindong returned, his brothers and sisters all sent people to the Yang family manor to take the initiative to meet him. It was likely that they also knew that their little brother's status was different. It was somewhat difficult for him to see them, and it was also a test of safety. This saved Yang Qindong the trouble of running around. He had already met with the people he needed to meet in the capital. If there really was something, they would naturally take the initiative to look for him at the Yang clan manor. With nothing else to do in the capital, Yang Qindong returned home. Under the protection of the first guard, he left the inner city and headed straight for the Yongding Gate. It was almost the new year, and the streets were bustling with people. There was an endless stream of peddlers, and the common people seemed to be spending more than half of their annual income in these few days. This made the city seem extremely lively, and there was already a festive atmosphere to it. Yang Qindong sat alone in his luxurious carriage, a sincere smile on his face as he listened to the hubbub of people outside. The common people lived and worked in peace and contentment. Wasn't this what all those who worried about the country and its people wanted to see? This was also the true reason Yang Qindong wanted to carry out a peaceful evolution. If possible, he naturally hoped to use the method of boiling a frog in warm water to influence and infiltrate the great Ming dynasty. In the end, they would become part of the new country without any signs of life. Nothing could be better than this. But now, it seemed that this was just a thought. Based on what Su Yozhin, Hu Shao, and Yang Guang had said, Ming had trained so many new soldiers and built so many firearms. It was clearly impossible for them not to fight a battle. Perhaps they were feeling too full of themselves, believing that they were the strongest army in the world and could properly wrestle with the mercenaries. When facing such a person, if one didn't beat them into submission, it would be impossible to convince them with words alone. When he thought of this matter, Yang Qindong couldn't help but think of Su Yozhin, who wanted to get off the ship. Previously, the Bureau of Security had noticed that this minister's attitude wasn't as proactive as before. There were even many things that he wouldn't say if one didn't ask. This hidden chess piece was already on the verge of going out of control. Fortunately, after that night's meeting, Yang Qindong's warning had an effect. It made Su Yozhin sober up and realize that there were some things that he couldn't do even if he didn't want to do them. There were some choices that had been made, and there was no way to regret it. Since that night, Su Yozhin had taken the initiative to contact the Bureau of Security as before. This was a typical example of someone who was asking for a beating. Some people were like this. The more you spoke to them nicely, the more they would ignore you. On the other hand, if you hardened your tone, the other party would be terrified. Thinking about Su Yozhin, Yang Qindong's lips curved into a smile. This was a sense of confidence after he had control of the situation. At this moment, he heard a very clear, hawking voice. Elixirs for sale. Elixirs for sale. Elixirs for sale. Elixirs for sale. If you eat my elixirs, you can prolong your life and stay young forever. This shout was very loud, at least far louder than the shouts of other people on the street. It also attracted the attention of Yang Qindong, who was sitting in the sedan. Chapter 8:11. Because of Yang Qindong, many items that shouldn't have appeared had appeared in advance, causing the market to become more prosperous and diverse. However, the production capacity of Qiqian City wasn't very high, and there were too many merchants who wanted to get their hands on their goods. As a result, there was a shortage of goods in the heavens beyond Trading Company. Some people couldn't get their hands on the goods, even if they had the money. Thus, some people started to learn how to fake goods. Fake goods weren't a product of a certain period of time. Instead, it was a kind of business that people were forced to do. Thus, there were many new and interesting items in the market. There were even some items that were imitations. However, these things only looked similar. When you actually held them in your hands, they were too heavy and crude. But because they were cheap, they still managed to gain a certain market share. As a result, some goods that didn't even exist in the heavens beyond Trading Company started to appear. However, things like immortal pills still attracted Yang Qindong's attention. Immortal pills were things that only existed in legends and were only recorded in the history books. It was as if they were just conjectures. How could they exist in this world? But now, there was actually someone hawking on the streets. It was impossible not to attract attention. Gently reaching out to touch the side curtain of the carriage, he saw a man dressed like a Taoist in a bagua robe peddling the goods in his hands. There were quite a number of people gathered in front of this stall, and it seemed to be very lively. Stop for a moment. Yang Qindong was also interested and called out to stop. The carriage that was in the midst of the commotion also stopped. The group of guards also widened their eyes and looked around, looking cautious and alert. The carriage stopped, and Yang Qindong walked out in large strides. He looked at Yang Si, who was waiting on the side of the carriage with a puzzled expression. He chuckled and said, "There is someone selling immortal pills over there. This young master is interested. Let's go take a look together." Okay, since it was an invitation from the young master, Yang Si naturally wouldn't reject it. He smiled and nodded in agreement. The two of them, one servant and one master, followed by a few guards, walked towards the seemingly lively stall. As he got closer, Yang Qindong could finally see the so-called immortal pill in the other party's hand. It was golden, as if it was made of gold. From its appearance, it was quite interesting. "Taoist priest, how much is this elixir?" Before Yang Qindong could approach, someone in the crowd asked. I can't say that this is a sale but an invitation. Only those who are fated will be able to obtain it. Let's put it this way, 1,000 taels per pill, no bargaining. The first part was a bit profound, but when it came to the price, the merchant's unscrupulous appearance was completely exposed. When they heard that it was 1,000 taels for one pill, the people who were originally interested in it all shook their heads. Originally, they thought that if the price was right, they would sell one back. Regardless of whether it was real or fake, they would just treat it as buying a fresh one. However, if it was 1,000 taels per pill, it was really too expensive. No one would spend so much money just because of curiosity. The crowd suddenly quieted down. When the Taoist priest saw that there was going to be an awkward silence, he couldn't help but say anxiously, "You guys don't believe me. This is the price. How can immortal pills not be a lot? Do you know that I met the Grand Supreme Elderly Lord in my dream? This was given to me by him. It is far from something that can be measured by money." With this explanation, some people who had already wanted to leave couldn't help but hesitate. Previously, they thought that this bet was a scammer. However, when they heard that this matter was linked to immortals and the price was so expensive, they couldn't help but hesitate. But after all, it was 1,000 taels. No matter who wanted to take out this much money, they would have to consider it carefully. This actually helped Yang Qindong. He laughed and squeezed through the crowd. "Come, let me see. If it is really something good, I will take all of your immortal pills." Yang Qindong naturally wouldn't really believe that there were immortal pills in this world. He just looked at it curiously. It would be fun to buy it for his 2 wives to play with. When the voice rang out, it naturally attracted everyone's curious gaze. This was a rich guest coming to visit. It was impossible not to attract everyone's attention. Because of this voice, Yang Qindong also quickly passed through the crowd and came in front of the Taoist priest. Other than Yang Si, who was following closely by his side, the other guards were blocked out of the crowd for a moment. This young master is someone who knows his stuff. Come up and take a look. Seeing that there was a guest, the Taoist priest's anxious expression changed. He laughed and handed the golden immortal pill in his hand to Yang Qindong. But because there was still a stall between them, his hand still couldn't reach in front of Yang Qindong. Since the Taoist priest couldn't pass it to him, Yang Qindong reached out to take it and squeezed his body forward. Just when his arm was about to touch the Taoist priest's palm, the Taoist priest's eyes suddenly flashed a murderous intent. Then he suddenly raised his left arm that hadn't moved. A black muzzle was aimed at Yang Qindong's body. The sudden accident caught everyone off guard. Even Yang Qindong instinctively moved his body sideways in the face of this unexpected situation. And just as he moved, a gunshot sounded. The flintlock hit Yang Qindong's body. The strong recoil made his body tremble. "There's an assassin!" Yang Si, who was following by the side, witnessed all of this with his own eyes. His eyes immediately turned red. His right hand touched his waist. There was a Type 54 that he always carried. Daring to assassinate the young master, no matter who this person was, he must die. His hand reached behind him. Yang Si's face quickly changed. It was not because of anything else, but because his hand was suddenly pressed down by someone. That person seemed to be incomparably strong. He actually made his body unable to move at all. Since they had set up a killing trap, the Taoist priest would not be the only killer. Among the crowd, there were many of his accomplices. Seeing that they had started to act, these people did not hide anymore. One by one, they used their own methods. Yang Qindong was hit by a flintlock at close range and fell to the ground. Yang Si, who was the closest, was also temporarily restrained. This kind of assassination scene was seriously a first. In the past, when there was an assassination, the clues would always be discovered at the first moment and then disappear into nothingness. It was a frightening but not dangerous existence. But, like this time at such a close range, it was really the first time that he was killed. If it was a normal time, Yang Qindong would still be vigilant with his qi. But today, as soon as he appeared, he shocked Dong Chunhua and made him retreat. This made him a little arrogant, coupled with the fact that this place was in the midst of a riot and a hubbub of voices. It was even more difficult to spot the problem in such an environment. This gave the enemy a chance to succeed. Yang Qindong was shot to the ground. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth, and his face was a little pale. It was unknown whether he was alive or dead. But even so, the Taoist priest was still unwilling to die without seeing with his own eyes. He suddenly pushed the stall in front of him away, then held another loaded flintlock in his hand and aimed at Yang Qindong again. But this time the target was not his body but his head. After aiming at the target, the Taoist priest pulled the trigger. It looked like he was going to shoot Yang Qindong on the spot. Ah, get lost. It was at this moment that a loud shout rang out. Yang Si, who had his right arm pressed down, roared angrily. All the strength in his body erupted at this moment. He endured the pain of his dislocated right arm and rushed out from the crowd, arriving in front of the Taoist priest's gun. Bang! At this time a gunshot sounded. This bullet hit Yang Si's body. The strong force pushed Yang Si away, causing him to fall on Yang Qindong, who was unconscious on the ground. It was this pounce that awakened Yang Qindong, who had suddenly received a blow. The moment he opened his eyes, he saw a few strong men slashing at Yang Si's back. After a few slashes, blood was dripping, and red blood covered the ground. Ah, Yang Si! Yang Qindong, who was awake, immediately shouted in his heart. Then he suddenly jumped up from the ground. While holding Yang Si in his arms, he took out a desert eagle and fired at the assassins in front of him. Bang, bang, bang. Every time a shot was fired, blood would splatter. Under the powerful lethality of the desert eagle, 2 of the 3 people who were wielding the sword had their heads smashed, and their faces were unrecognizable. Another person was shot in the stomach, causing his intestines and blood to flow all over the ground. All of this happened in a very short period of time. At this time, the guards who were isolated from the crowd also reacted. With Captain Chiu Vi as the leader, Ba Daojiang on the left, and Pan Yu on the right, the 3 members formed a 3-3 formation. They held the Type 95 in their hands and activated the burst mode. Anyone who dared to block in front of them, no matter if it was an assassin or an ordinary person who was watching the show, would become their enemy. Da-da, da-da-da, the gunshots were endless, and one figure after another fell to the ground. Even the Taoist in the Taoist robe did not manage to escape. He was shot in the head by the angry Ba Daojiang and fell to the ground with blood all over his body. 6th young master, Chiu Vi, and the other 2 formed the first echelon and came to Yang Qindong's side. The other guards were also rushing over. What are you looking at? Who has hemostatic medicine on them? Take it out. Yang Qindong shouted crazily. At this time his body was covered in blood, all of which flowed out from Yang Si's body. In order to protect himself, this person forcefully dislocated his arm, took a shot, and was even slashed several times. He was already on the verge of death. Chapter 812. I have it. Ba Daojiang reached into his chest and took out a small, white porcelain bottle. People like him who had been in the Jianghu for a long time naturally carried hemostatic medicine with them. He reached out and took it, then quickly laid Yang Si's body flat. First, he used a little force to reattach the dislocated arm. Then he tore apart Yang Si's clothes, revealing a layer of bulletproof vest inside. When it was taken off, a bloody red back was revealed. When the porcelain bottle was opened, the powder sprinkled on the back like rain, immediately causing Yang Si's body to twitch. It was obvious that the effect of the medicine was good. It had the effect of reducing inflammation and stopping bleeding. Yang Si's body also reacted. It was a good thing that there was a reaction. At least it meant that Yang Si's body was still breathing. Yang Qindong was immediately overjoyed. He shouted loudly, "Yang Si, you have to hold on. Hold on. With the young master here, you will be fine. Men, quickly bring the carriage here." Just as Yang Qindong was about to save Yang Si, a large number of Ming soldiers suddenly appeared on the street. As soon as they appeared, the originally bustling street instantly became empty. The black cavalry guards also widened their eyes and stared at the newcomers. Many of them even took out the 95 style. Previously, it was because they were careless and did not fulfill their duties that the sixth young master was in danger. Now that they were prepared, how could they let the previous incident happen again? Under the black muzzles of the guns, the Ming soldiers who came from afar trembled. The leader, who was wearing a general's uniform, was sweating profusely. He led his men forward and shouted, "Everyone, don't be nervous. I am Dong Bao, the general of the Yongding Gate. What happened here?" Actually, there was no need to ask. Looking at the formation in front of him, especially the black knights with obvious markings, Dong Bao knew that the Duke of Loyalty was in danger. It was only because this place was the closest to the Yongding Gate that he had to come and take a look. Otherwise, he was afraid that if his superiors blamed him, he would have to bear the consequences. The person reported his name with a careful and cautious expression. The Black Knights noticed this, and their gazes landed on Captain Chiu Vi. Chiu Vi naturally couldn't make the decision on such an important matter. He glanced at Yang Qindong cautiously and asked, "Sixth young master, the general guarding the Yongding Gate is here. What do you think? Call him over." He was worried about Yang Si's injury and thought that it would be best to find a quiet place immediately and find a doctor to treat him. So at this time, he couldn't think of anything else. Hearing Yang Qindong's order, Chiu Vi immediately responded. Then he said to Dong Bao, who was still trembling with fear, "General Dong, come over." "Yes, yes." Dong Bao answered like a lackey and trotted forward with his head lowered. However, the moment he lowered his head, his previous panic disappeared and was replaced by a look of determination. Because his head was lowered, no one noticed his change at all. Dong Bao trotted toward Yang Qindong. When he was 5 meters away, Chiu Vi suddenly shouted, "Okay, just stand there." With the previous lesson, he would never allow an unknown person to be so close to the sixth young master. With this shout, Dong Bao's body involuntarily slowed down. However, his body did not stop obediently. Instead, he continued to move forward. As he walked, he said, "We are so far away. How can I listen to the Duke of Loyalty's admonition? If I tell you to stop, then stop. If you continue to move forward, I will shoot." Seeing that Dong Bao was already 4 meters away, but he still didn't stop, Ba Daojiang's eyes flashed with anger, and he shouted loudly. With this shout, the meaning of reminder and warning was very obvious. Even Yang Qindong, who had been lowering his head to check on Yang Si's injuries, couldn't help but raise his head. When he raised his head, he suddenly shouted, "Not good, everyone spread out." As he spoke, Yang Qindong was the first to retreat with Yang Si in his arms. With a leap, he covered a distance of 2 to 3 meters. Chiu Vi, Ba Daojiang, and Pang Yu, who were the closest, had long been used to following Yang Qindong's orders. This shout was equivalent to an order, and they quickly retreated into the distance. With this shout, Dong Bao's body suddenly emitted green smoke. That was the appearance of gunpowder after it was ignited. Then, with a face full of laughter, Dong Bao immediately followed in the direction Yang Qindong ran in. Bang! He fired a shot, completely relying on his intuition. He even skipped the process of aiming. With this shot, Dong Bao, who was moving forward, fell to his knees with a thud. It was also at this moment that he realized in horror that his right knee had been smashed, and he could no longer maintain the posture of moving forward. The sound of the gunshot shocked everyone. However, with an even louder explosion, the gunpowder in Dong Bao's body exploded. In an instant, everything within 3 meters of Dong Bao was turned into nothingness. The place where he was previously standing was also turned into a deep pit, indicating the powerful power of the gunpowder. Ah, they killed General Dong. This is clearly a rebellion. Brothers, let's kill them together. Just after this explosion, a voice suddenly came from the crowd of Ming army. Then a gunshot rang out, and a black knight on a horse fell to the ground. Looking carefully, that gunshot was fired by the Ming army. This time, Chao Exayan got a total of 3 guns. 2 of them were on the Taoist priest, and the other one was hidden in the Ming army as a backup. With this gunshot, a black knight fell from his horse. The situation that was originally under control became chaotic again. More and more Ming soldiers began to attack the Black Knights and Yang Qindong. It was obvious that they wanted to use their advantage in numbers to completely engulf them. Although Dong Bao was dead, the number of soldiers he brought with him was not small. From a distance, there were at least 500 or 600 people. Moreover, this did not exclude the possibility that there might be assassins in the dark and more soldiers gathering to attack. On the other hand, Yang Qindong only had about 50 people from the first guard squad. This was more than 10 times the number of soldiers they had. As the captain, Qiu Vi suddenly felt a lot of pressure. At this time, the carriage was already in front of Yang Qindong. Because he dodged quickly, Dong Bao's human bomb didn't hit him. However, the power of the aftershock was still not small. It hit his back, and at this time, the green clothes he was wearing were already tattered. Fortunately, it was winter, so he wore a lot of thick clothes. Even so, the bulletproof vest still revealed some of his true colors. Fire the signal flare. Before the reinforcements arrive, no one is allowed to get close to the carriage. This is an absolute order. With both hands holding the unconscious and bleeding Yangtze, Yang Qindong gave the absolute order to Qiu Vi with a cold face. 6th young master, don't worry. Unless all the soldiers are sacrificed, no one is allowed to get close to the carriage. Qiu Vi saluted with a serious expression. After watching Yang Qindong enter the carriage, he turned around and took out a signal flare from his waist. As a person who followed the 6th young master, he naturally carried a signal flare with him at all times. But there weren't many situations where he could actually use it. Every time he used it, it meant that the situation was critical and dangerous. Bang! With a loud sound, a powerful red signal flare rose into the air. Although it was still daytime, the signal flare was still very eye-catching to ensure that it would attract people's attention. After the signal flare was fired, Qiu Vi stood in front of the carriage and looked at the first guard squad members who were looking at him because of the signal flare. He said in a loud voice, "The 6th young master ordered that no one is allowed to get close to the carriage. The rest is up to my comrades." Yes, everyone shouted in unison from the bottom of their hearts. After the 49 guard squad members responded, they quickly began to retreat. While they were retreating, the 95 style in their hands spewed out flames and shot fatal bullets at the enemies charging at them. Just as Qiu Vi was worried, the enemy wasn't just the 500 or 600 people in front of them. As the gunshots rang out, the Ming soldiers who were charging at the front fell to the ground one by one. Many men dressed in black appeared from the sides and behind them. They held bows and crossbows in their hands and quickly approached them while continuously shooting arrows. They looked like they were going to eat the first guard squad members alive. After more than 200 Ming soldiers were killed, they learned to be smart. They didn't charge blindly. Instead, they took advantage of the complicated terrain on the street and began to look for a place to hide. Once they were safe, they would immediately pick up the bows on their backs and launch a long-range counterattack. It was true that they were not a match for the continuous fire guns, but they did not believe that these dozens of people would be able to carry much ammunition. Even if they had to exhaust the mercenaries, they had to exhaust them. The signal flare for help had been sent out, but it would take some time for them to appear. How to control the situation during this time, prevent the enemy from approaching the carriage, and complete the task given by the sixth young master became the most important problem. Just as the dead man thought, when they went out this time, because there was no plan at all, each soldier didn't bring a lot of bullets. In addition to the magazine in the gun, each soldier only brought 2 more. They thought that after a fierce attack, the enemies would be afraid and retreat. But the enemies in front of them were very tenacious. They looked like they didn't care about their lives. Coupled with the complicated terrain, the power of the 95 style was greatly restrained. Just like the previous wave of attacks, each soldier used up a magazine. If they continued like before, at most 2 more waves of attacks, they would run out of ammunition. Chapter 8:13. Everyone listen up. Switch from continuous fire to burst fire. Don't think about killing too many enemies. Focus on suppressing them and wait for reinforcements. Chiu V made the most accurate judgment on the battlefield after a simple analysis. Following his orders, the guards reduced the number of shots they fired. They would only fire back when the enemy's figure was completely revealed or when they were about to charge forward and threaten them. This was perhaps the biggest drawback of firearms. Unlike swords, knives, spears, swords, and staffs, which could be used repeatedly without logistical support, the number of bullets would decrease. The mercenaries changed their strategy and focused on stability. As the enemy, the northern Ming soldiers became even more arrogant. Seeing that there were no more bullets flying, they immediately shouted, "The enemy's muskets have run out of gunpowder. Next, it's our turn to attack. Brothers, let's charge! Kill the Duke of Loyalty, and everyone will be rewarded with 500 taels of silver and be promoted by 3 ranks." The effect of the shout was obvious. The northern Ming soldiers, who were originally under the threat of the 9-5 and had already found a place to hide, were all enraged when they heard such a reward. Then they revealed their heads from the shadows. Then, while shooting arrows, they rushed onto the main street and launched a second attack on the guards. At the sides and back of the carriage, there were at least 40 black-clothed men moving about. They were using even more advanced crossbows and arrows. Within a distance of less than 100 meters, the threat of such weapons was extremely great. In just a short while, 7 or 8 guards had been hit by the arrows. If they weren't wearing bulletproof vests, they would have become cold corpses by now. There was a large army attacking from the front, and there were people causing trouble from the sides and the rear. The first guard squad fell into a bitter battle that they had never used before. As the captain, Chiu V had already finished the 9-5 and was using a pistol. Even the pistols, 2 spare magazines, were used up. Now, there were less than 3 bullets left in the pistol. The security team members guarding the front also fired a burst of bullets, forcibly suppressing the enemy's second attack. Then, everyone's face was solemn as they reloaded their last spare magazine. They knew that this would be their last hope. The enemies in front of him were suppressed, and the men in black behind him threw down more than 20 corpses. However, the death rate didn't scare them away. These people were like members of a suicide squad. They didn't even look at the death of their companions. Their eyes were fixed on the carriage in front of them. Their target hadn't died yet, which meant that their mission hadn't been completed yet. They still had to continue on their journey. Chiu V fired the last few bullets from his pistol. However, the enemy was moving at high speed. He only managed to injure 1 person. Chiu V then holstered his pistol and pulled out the 3 bayonets from his waist. He shouted, "Soldiers on both sides, follow me. No matter what, we cannot let them get close to the carriage." Without firearms, Chiu V and the others would have to complete the mission given to them by the 6th young master, even if they had to use cold weapons. This was their mission and responsibility. Even if there was only 1 person left, no one would take a step back. "Charge!" Ba, Dao Jiang, Peng Yu, and the others responded enthusiastically. They also pulled out their bayonets and rushed towards the men in black. After that, there was a series of clanging sounds as the 2 sides fought each other, and the fight became a mess. Close combat was far crueler than using firearms to kill people. Often, even if they were beaten until they were covered in blood and had lost their arms, they could still pose a threat to their opponents with their steel teeth. In such a battle, it was basically impossible to escape unscathed, even though the individual qualities of the guards were very strong. In a battle of life and death, it was still inevitable that they would be injured or even killed in battle. After only a few exchanges, half of the remaining 20 or so black-clothed men fell, and 2 of the guards were killed and 3 were injured. These men in black were the type that knew martial arts. In terms of individual combat strength, they were far superior to ordinary Ming soldiers. Even the embroidered uniform guards, who boasted extraordinary combat strength, could not reach their level. Moreover, the arrows in these men's hands were highly toxic. Once shot, it would not take long for them to foam at the mouth and suffocate to death. If the soldiers did not wear black armor outside and bulletproof vests inside, the number of casualties would be much higher than the men in black. Even so, Chiu Vi and the others did not intend to take half a step back. They were sad that their comrades had died, but they would not cry. They wanted to turn their sadness into motivation to kill more enemies and avenge their comrades. The rear was already engaged in a battle, and the guards were beginning to suffer casualties. The enemies in the front also tried to launch 2 small attacks. Perhaps it was because too many people had died before, so they were also afraid. But even if they were cautious enough to launch an attack, they still consumed a lot of the guards' bullets. Seeing that another big attack was coming, the 2 sides would inevitably have to fight with cold weapons. The situation was already very critical at this point. In the carriage, Yang Si had already been laid down flat. Fortunately, the space was big enough for Yang Qindong to use. Yang Qindong no longer cared about everything outside the carriage. Since he had handed the mission to Chiu Vi, he had to completely trust him. Right now, he had another mission to do, and that was to save Yang Si. Although Yang Si's identity was only a servant of the Yang family, whether in the eyes of Yang Qindong or in the eyes of outsiders, it was not like this. They seemed to have become his family, his closest relatives. How could Yang Qindong watch his closest relatives die in front of him and not care? Not to mention, Yang Si's injuries were caused by protecting himself, so there was no reason for him to not care. Speaking of which, Yang Si's body did not have any fatal injuries. Most of them were caused by external injuries. The only fatal injury was excessive blood loss. In the eyes of outsiders, this kind of excessive blood loss was naturally beyond their ability. However, for Yang Qindong, who had experienced hundreds of battles, suffered countless injuries, and completed countless life and death missions, it was not without a bit of hope. In the carriage, Yang Qindong first, roughly, checked Yang Si's injuries. After knowing that he fainted because of excessive blood loss, he disappeared from the spot. When he reappeared, there were a few disposable infusion tubes and needles in his hands. Let's go all out. Although I haven't checked, I don't think there will be any changes to his blood type. He sighed to himself. In his past life, he was a type O all-purpose blood type. He had given blood to and received blood from his comrades more than once. Even without anyone's help, he could still do this job very well. As if he had done it many times before, Yang Qindong stabbed the needle into his arm. Outside the carriage, the battle was still ongoing. It had already been at a stalemate for more than an hour. The casualties on both sides were constantly increasing. 300 meters away, atop the high walls of a residence, Chao Qin was watching this scene with a fierce expression. Today's events were all part of his plan. By chance, his subordinates saw the imperial censor of the right enter the immortal abode and hurriedly reported it to him. Then, the massive battle plan was put into motion. First, the poison experts of the embroidered uniform guard entered the immortal abode, as if they were looking for someone, and sprinkled laxatives into Dong Chunhua's food. Then, they waited for Yang Qindong to appear. As expected, this matter involved a major second-rank official. As expected, Yang Qindong had come to the capital. However, Chao Qin wasn't satisfied with the 50 or so guards at his side. But that didn't matter. The military strength he had arranged was several times that of the enemy's. Coupled with the sudden attack, they had at least a 70% chance of victory. The Taoist priest selling immortal pills was just a cover. Even Chao Qin himself wasn't sure if it would pique Yang Qindong's curiosity. If it didn't work, then they could only wait for the Duke of Loyalty to arrive at the Yongding Gate. The heavens seemed to be very fond of him. Yang Qindong really stopped, and this made Chao Xian extremely excited. He seemed to have already seen the scene of Yang Qindong's death. He saw the scene of Yang Qindong's death leading to a fight between the mercenaries and the northern Ming dynasty, and the southern Ming dynasty reaping the benefits. But another accident disrupted Chao Qin's plans. Those black-clad guards were actually so difficult to deal with. Again and again, even after using the 3 guns he'd spent so much effort to obtain, they still couldn't kill Yang Qindong. This made him feel like he'd punched an iron pot. He knew that he wouldn't have another chance. Helpless, Chao Qin gave the order to attack with all his might. He sent out all the experts he'd brought with him from Ming, looking like he was willing to sacrifice everyone to complete this mission. As the battle continued, the situation seemed to become more and more unfavorable for him. Chao Qin's heart became heavier and heavier when he saw the mercenaries in black armor, making him feel helpless. Most of the casualties were his own warriors. "Sir, look over there. Is that Bai Ming's army?" At this moment, a subordinate's voice sounded in his ear, attracting Chao Qin's attention. After an hour, the Bai Ming army in the city finally made a move. A large number of soldiers rushed over. Speaking of which, Bai Ming's army shouldn't take so long to react to something like this. In fact, less than half an hour after the incident happened, the higher-ups in the Bai Ming army knew about it. But when they found out that the Duke of Loyalty was involved, they didn't immediately send out the order to send troops. Instead, they sent someone to report the news to the palace. Unexpectedly, they didn't receive the order immediately. It turned out that the acting sect master, Zhu Qiyu, was hesitating. You're tuning in to the Thunder Spear YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.